Morning, Glory America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I am back in California, but I cannot come into the studio today. So for the second day in a row, my friend from Texas, I can't even get used to saying that. He used to be my friend from Minnesota cold. Ed Morrissey is relocated from the great North Plain to the great Southern Plain of Texas, is back and sitting in for me for the first 2 hours today before the Hillsdale Dialogue. Ed Morrissey, thank you, my friend.
Good morning. Thank you, Hugh Hewitt. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today from the ReliefFactor.com studios in the great southern plain of Texas, right here outside the Alamo. Not actually really outside the Alamo, but if you're watching on the universe, HUGHNIVERSE.com, you would see me parked in front of a brilliant picture of the Alamo. That's me celebrating my Texas culture. Not too far from the border, actually, and that is our first topic today because I'm actually very pleased to tell you this morning. If you've just woken up, you may not even realize this, but Joe Biden actually has a plan to deal with the border crisis. Dwayne, did you know that Joe Biden actually has a plan to deal with the border crisis?
He has a plan.
He has a plan. It's 9 months in office. He's finally formulated a plan, according to CNN and Reuters this morning.
Okay, so let's go back and review the record because the last administration had a plan.
Yes, they did. It had a plan.
And the first day in office, this administration didn't like that plan. So
it was inhumane. It was inhumane. It was cruel. So Donald Trump's plan to secure the border was inhumane and cruel, and Joe Biden insisted that it had to be changed on day one of his presidency.
Not just changed, but eliminated.
Eliminated. Completely eliminated.
So by the stroke of an executive order, he decided to drop it, and it got challenged in court. And the Biden administration fought it in court, saying, we can do this. And the court said, no. The Trump administration actually signed an actual document. It wasn't an executive order. It was an actual thing that he did. You can't just do away with the stroke of a pen. And so the court tried to reinstate it, and this administration said, well, we're going to do a workaround. We're going to find some way to make this thing go away. So I know it's not that. Wait.
Well, Dwayne, I'm telling you that that's exactly what it is. According to CNN, according to Reuters, I'll just read you right off of CNN's report from this morning. Just before we went on the air, I found this. They were tweeting it out just before we went on the air. The Biden administration is preparing to revive in mid-November a Trump-era border policy that forces migrants to stay in Mexico until their U.S. immigration court date, according to administration officials putting it on track to implement another controversial policy at the U.S. southern border. So in other words, Joe Biden has a plan. It's Donald Trump's.
And it's now humane after they had 100,000 migrants come into the country.
I love it when a plan comes together.
I do too.
Once we had the requisite amount of people come into the country illegally, now it becomes humane to.
Well, there's more to this, of course, Dwayne. And, we're having a little bit. Having a little bit of fun with this, but there's a little more to this.
With this administration, there always is.
There always is. Now, as Dwayne was telling us, the administration is being forced to re-adopt the Remain in Mexico policy. The federal judge in August ruled that their policy change had violated the Administrative Procedure Act, which usually catches most presidents by surprise, that you actually have to have a process to change policies, and EOs alone don't do it. And so they were forced to readopt this anyway. They've been appealing it ever since. The Supreme Court finally refused to hear an appeal on this, and now they're stuck with Remain in Mexico policy. So in part, that's what this is. However, when you read the CNN report on this, it actually sounds that they're going to actually change their policy back to Remain in Mexico. If you go to Reuters, it sounds a little different at Reuters. This is how Reuters reports it. They're taking steps to restart by mid-November a program begun under his predecessor, Donald Trump, that forced asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for U.S. court hearings after a federal court deemed the termination of the program unjustified, U.S. officials said Thursday. The administration, however, is planning to make another attempt to rescind the Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, commonly called the Remain in Mexico policy, even as it takes steps to comply with the August ruling. So, Dwayne, what the actual plan is to implement Remain in Mexico while trying to stop the implementation of Remain in Mexico, which is also very much like this Biden administration. They're going in two opposite directions at the same time.
He's going full John Kerry. I actually voted for the $87 billion before I voted against it.
Right.
I mean, this is in league with what we saw at the Supreme Court this week.
Amy Coney Barrett's comment to the Solicitor General about the death penalty case with Tsarnaev.
Yeah. You know, the Biden administration campaigned, has implemented policy at the DOJ level. They are trying to end capital punishment. They do not want any more federal executions. He ran on it.
This was on his issues page that he was running on the idea of eliminating the death penalty. He just wants Congress to do it, which is, clearly how it should be worked anyway. I mean, constitutionally, it's Congress that has to pass that. However, let's not forget that the president has plenary commutation powers, and he could simply commute everybody's death sentence on federal death row to life without parole.
Right. So he still
doesn't want to do that, though. He doesn't want to do that because
it would create a
risk of it.
Right, political headaches it would cause. So
right.
You have the Tsarnaev case where a jury of his peers in Massachusetts gave him the death penalty for basically bombing the Boston Marathon.
For radical Islamist terrorism.
Correct.
Yes.
It got appealed, and his death penalty got overturned at the appellate court level.
For a couple of technical reasons, not to say that they aren't substantive too, but I mean there was issue of voir dire, whether or not that they voir dired effectively on pretrial publicity, which is that's a real issue.
It's a legal motion. It's now being appealed back to the Supreme Court to reinstate the Department of Justice, who again wants to ban all federal executions, is now appealing to the Supreme Court, heard by the 9 this week, to reinstate the death penalty on Tsarnaev. Amy Coney Barrett is looking at the Solicitor General and saying, okay, Sparky, can you explain to me why you want to restore the death penalty on this guy and then turn around and ban all federal executions? Why are you here exactly?
What's the point of this? It's a
mixed
theater.
signal. It's a mixed message.
It's not even a mixed message. Political theater.
Nobody knows what this administration truly wants.
Joe Biden wants to eat his cake and have it too. On the death penalty and on being a tough guy on terrorism while getting rid of the death penalty. That's Joe Biden's play there. And the same thing is true here, by the way. And here's what the actual play is here. They want to be seen as complying with the court's order. So they're going to go ahead and reinstate this Remain in Mexico policy. The target date for the re-implementation of this, according to CNN and according to Reuters, is mid-November, so it's a month off. Now, why would it take a month to restore this policy when the court ordered it back in August? Well, the reason why is that the Biden administration, this is more evident in the Reuters report than it is in the CNN report, they're going to go back to the Remain in Mexico policy conditionally. And the condition is that Mexico agrees to do this. And Mexico is not going to agree to do this. If you remember what the sequence was when Donald Trump created the Remain in Mexico policy, he put a great deal of economic pressure on Mexico to comply with this.
Right? He
strong-armed them. Yeah, he threatened a trade war with Mexico. He threatened to blockade the trade border with Mexico, and Mexico finally agreed to the Remain in Mexico policy as a trade-off against the trade war. I mean, I remember when people were talking about this as a trade war. So they were never happy about the Remain in Mexico policy, and as long as Donald Trump was in office, though, they understood that they were going to have to keep it. Now Joe Biden is saying, well, it's going to be dependent on whether or not Mexico agrees to do with this because, and this is actually fairly clever, the federal court can't order Mexico to do it.
Right. So Biden is going to be mealy-mouthed about the whole thing, and then go to Mexico and say, hey, Can we go back to the deal you had with Trump? And Mexico's going to say pound sand. As soon as Mexico says that, then Biden go back to the court. Well, we tried. Shucks.
It's not our fault.
We did our best.
It's not our fault. I'm sorry. So, yeah, I mean, at least it's a plan. It's the first, somewhat strategic plan we've seen from
It's a
Joe Biden
plan.
on the border.
What it is it's planned fecklessness.
Yeah, but it's planned.
It's
That's still an
intended
improvement.
Planned
It's
fecklessness.
planned.
Instead of unintended fecklessness, it's planned fecklessness.
It's planned fecklessness. At least it's an improvement. I'm Ed Morrissey, filling in for Hugh Hewitt. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
I have never seen in my life the orchestrated hatred to a group of Americans as I am seeing now. It's orchestrated hatred. You are allowed to hate the unvaccinated. Even if the unvaccinated had COVID already, and there is no scientific reason whatsoever for them to take as minimal a risk as it is the vaccine. You are to hate these people. They are killers. They are killing you and themselves. This is this piece of crap governor of California on television.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Because the left is trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out, again, who's going to comply. Are you going to comply? Who's going to resist? Are you going to be willing to resist? How much power and coercion, this is what the left is trying to figure out, will it take to break the rest of us, the nonconformists? And who are the reliable, useful idiots? And sadly, there's plenty of those in the media. I've been telling you time and time again, we can't trust our institutions, the media being one of them. If you want to know what the left is thinking, you can look at the New York Times. You can figure out the angles they're coming from. There's other places, Vox, Slate, so on, etc. You can figure out, and you should know where they're coming from. Quite frankly, Washington Post is another one. Huffington Post is another one, and you can figure out where the left is coming from.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Streaming on Salem Now.
The most powerful organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized.
We are now all rooting for his success.
That's not what happened. It was a complete ambush.
I thought it's early enough. Let's just send a couple guys over.
And the audience was, ha, 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 ha. How funny to set up an innocent man.
This is what third world security states do. They spy on their political opponents like this.
This is part of a concerted Russian influence operation.
Russians, I'm not going to be specific as
he knew he could just say it on TV and then hide behind, well, it's all classified, I can't get into it.
It divided the country in ways that people can't imagine. It's inspired massive violence. It's given people who are bad faith actors a license to do whatever they want.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
To hear the White House press secretary blame Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott and other Republican governors for playing politics by trying to preserve jobs, not let people get fired over the vaccine mandate. What's the political gain for a governor to stand up to a tyrannical machine and say, you're not going to fire people because they don't want to put a medicine in their arm? You can't try to draw that line in the sand and say, well, the government shouldn't do it, but businesses can. We're either going to fire people over a personal medical decision or we're not. You're splitting hairs when you say, well, now the government, Gary Kelly flat out said, we don't want to do this at Southwest Airlines. He knows that this is a work stoppage. What's happened in Southwest, it isn't weather. They're not having any computer glitches. They got people working who aren't going to show. We don't want this. Biden's making us do it. The government's making us do it. These zealots in charge. The kind of tyrannical governors we saw putting lines in the Home Depot, and you can go to the garden section, but you can't go to the towel section, and all this crap. put a mask on to walk to your table and take the mask off when you sit at the table. Like you can't spread COVID at the table, but you can when you're walking to the men's room. Are you kidding me? Would you stop it? And worst of all, forcing people to take a vaccine or get fired.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Welcome back. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt today. Got a great show coming up. Still got Sonny Bunch and Doug Lemerises coming up. But right now I want to talk to you about Alliance Defending Freedom. All this month, Hugh has been sharing many real-life examples of how your freedoms can be threatened by government and why it's so critically important that you go to HughHewitt.com right now today and click on the Alliance Defending Freedom banner to donate to ADF, America's largest and most successful Christian nonprofit legal defense organization. You'd think a church would be the last place that would have to worry about religious freedom. But over this past year, we've seen even churches being forced to close during the pandemic, something that raises big concerns by many public figures, including former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
There are those who would want to deny us the capacity to practice our faith and to worship in the way that we choose, or if we choose not to, no faith at all. We need to make sure that this nation remains that beacon of religious freedom for the entire world, to model how the dignity of every human being created in the image of God can be reflected by the capacity for those individuals to practice their faith.
ADF is fighting for us, so let's open our hearts and our wallets for them. Before your weekend begins, if you can afford a tax-deductible $100 gift for the Freedom Fund, I need your help right now to join Hugh Hewitt's campaign. If $100 is too much for you, we welcome your donation in any amount. Just go to HughHewitt.com and click on the Alliance Defending Freedom banner or phone your gift to my special ADF hotline, 866-359-9644. Again, that's 866-359-9644. And thank you for supporting our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom. And now let's go to the other topic in Washington, D.C., the other two directions at the same time, total chaos topic, which is the reconciliation bill. Yesterday we had two very different points of view come out. You had Kyrsten Sinema, who said that she isn't even going to vote to open debate on the reconciliation bill until the House passes the bipartisan infrastructure bill that it's been sitting on, and that Joe Biden and the progressives have tied to the reconciliation bill. After that, in a virtual town hall, House Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal had an answer for that. Let's go to cut number 12.
Now, a lot of people have asked, isn't something better than nothing? And the answer, quite simply, is no. Because when it comes down to something rather than nothing, it's the same people who are forced to settle for nothing over and over and over again. It's the reason why we have a housing crisis in this country, with public housing having fallen into such decay that it's threatening the health of people who live there. It's how we got to a code red for humanity on climate, and our government is still subsidizing fossil fuel companies. And we're not going to ask people to get by with nothing, while millionaires and billionaires continue to get richer without paying anywhere near their fair share in taxes.
Hey, I'm on Team Nothing.
I'm on Team Nothing too. And here is my advice for Hugh Hewitt fans and listeners. After you give the $100 donation gift to ADF Legal Foundation, whatever extra cash you have, invest it in popcorn. Because there's going to be a lot of popcorn passing when this whole thing collapses. The reconciliation bill, the infrastructure bill, the entire thing is going to collapse because you have two different wings of the Democratic Party, neither of whom can take a victory. Neither of whom can actually understand that they had a victory in their hand with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and they're about to just simply let it dissipate into the ether even if they pass it now, it's still going to look like a loss. You're going to have progressives that are going to be extremely angry when that infrastructure bill passes and the reconciliation bill goes nowhere. You're going to have a complete Civil War meltdown on the Democratic side of the aisle. This is a win turned into a loss. This is almost the literal definition of snatching victory or snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. It's insane. Is something better than nothing? I guarantee you that the answer is almost always yes. And when you have radical activists that are put in charge of your agenda, these are the perverse incentives that follow. I mean, there's no better way to describe what Jayapal and the progressives are trying to do. They're going to torpedo the entire agenda just because they can't pass the entire agenda all at once. It's absolutely mind-numbing, but it's also really fun for popcorn passing. Speaking of popcorn, coming up next, movies with Sonny Bunch. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
He is America. Captain America's trying, but nah, not so much. It's Superman. That's why kids have loved him. Adults have loved. When I saw Superman, I was, 8 years old, and I saw Christopher Reeve. You believed a man could fly. And I wanted to be an American, and now I am. But they've killed it. They killed James Bond in the new movie. Sorry, guys, spoilers. I've seen it. It's crap. Don't waste your time. They killed James Bond. Dead. Gone. Because I guess what? He was too sexy? Too toxic in his masculinity? Gone! And now they've done it with the Superman franchise. I posted this yesterday. Turned my Instagram on fire. The image of Superman in a homosexual kiss. Because DC Comics, I guess they don't want to sell comics. And now the new Superman, the son of Kal-El, is going to come out as gay, or as Jeff pointed out, I guess he's bi, right? Whatever, who cares? But here's the bottom line. This is beautiful. I hope Media Matters is writing this one up. Hey, Zachy Poo, are you typing? How many homosexuals, how many gay people are there in society? 1%, 1.5%. Let's be generous. Let's double it. 3%! 3% of America are gay. And the gay people I know, they don't rub it in your face.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
The Democratic Party somehow has convinced black people that they're the good guys. Never mind the skanky history of the Democratic Party. That was a party of slavery. There is a whole big cottage industry for racism. If racism went away, a lot of people would be unemployed.
The mob during the Minneapolis riots following the death of George Floyd. A bunch of white thugs, frankly, burning down the city's traditional black and Asian business district.
They're racist, racist, racist. Everything's racist.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
But the issue that is animating conservatives, animating moderates in a way that is unexpected, that is moving people in massive numbers in the state of Virginia and nationally, is education. It's the number one issue. 77% of conservatives say that curriculum and education is a major issue. 51% of liberals say that it's a major issue. You go through the polling in Virginia. How much of a factor is each of these choices for your choice of governor? Abortion policy is 58% major factor, but curriculum on race and history, 62%. Now, the number one issue is Virginia's economy still, but getting up there is crime and safety in Virginia. These are pretty good numbers, I have to say, for a Republican, meaning like these are issues that Republicans usually do very well with. And now we're in this circumstance where Democrats, people on the left, on television are no longer able to hide. They are trying to change the baseline of what is the new normal. The Great Reset, if you will. They are trying to propagandize you and gaslight you into saying, well, of course, parents don't have any say over their kids' education. They never used to say this. They used to hide it. They used to disguise it. They used to camouflage it. Now they're outright saying it. Virginia gubernatorial candidate Terry Mcauliffe has come out and he said in his debate with Youngkin, quote, "I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach." He thought this was going to be like a big kind of rallying moment. Like,
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Right. So this has changed in the culture. We now have entire stadiums screaming blank Joe Biden.
Right.
I actually think that in some measure this is a sign of health in the country.
I don't think you're wrong. In fact, my last column, I talk about in essence, what the American people are feeling in terms of how they're being treated by the current administration.
Now, excuse me, by the way, I'm
in a society that wouldn't consider itself particularly Christocentric, and I am actually thankful, to your point, to see a degree of we're not going to let this abuse continue, even if it's nothing more than using our freedom of speech to say something that's very vulgar and attach it to him. We're not taking it anymore.
Keep up with what's trending.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt today, where we go from passing the popcorn to passing the popcorn, right over to Sonny Bunch of The Bulwark, at Sonny Bunch on Twitter. Sonny, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Ed. How's it going?
It's going great. It's going great. I understand that you've seen a couple of movies that are actually on my list. No Time to Die, the latest Bond film, and The Last Duel, which I only have seen brief clips of, and it looks really fascinating. Of course, a Ridley Scott film usually is pretty fascinating anyway. So let's start with The Last Duel, because this is I want to get more into Bond, because I want to get into the whole which Bond is best debate, which seems to be like an ongoing. It's the evergreen debate in Hollywood lore. But let's start with The Last Duel. Sure. What were your impressions there?
Sure. So The Last Duel is an interesting movie. It has been pitched in the trailers as a very serious examination of essentially a medieval Me Too, right? It is essentially a woman who is played by Jodie Comer says that she has been raped by a French noble played by Adam Driver, and her husband, played by Matt Damon, demands satisfaction. And it gets into all sorts of court intrigue between these three, plus Ben Affleck, who plays a kind of mid-tier lord, not the king, but the next step down regent or some such, whatever. I don't know exactly how the French do it over there. It's
I think
tricky.
He's a count, right? He's a count in this.
Viscount or some such. So anyway, the story is told in a sort of Rashomon style, right? It is told from the perspective of first Matt Damon's character, who is off fighting wars and learns of this horrible crime that's been committed against his wife. Then from Adam Driver's perspective, as the person who is accused of the crime, we see the act from his POV. And then from the wife's perspective, we get what the film describes as the truth. And it's interestingly done. The script is by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. It's their first time writing a script together since Good Will Hunting. And again, the way this movie has been pitched to people is kind of very serious, very dramatic, kind of Ridley Scott's historical epic. But what's interesting about the movie, as I was actually watching it, is that it's weirdly funny. It's almost there. The every time Ben Affleck in particular is on the screen, it has an almost frat comic style to it. There's a very weird undercurrent to the whole thing that is deeply amusing. I don't know exactly what to make of it in terms of what Damon and Affleck and Ridley Scott are trying to say about all this, but it is certainly it was not exactly what I was expecting. I was expecting something a bit more dour than this turned out to be. It's good. It's interesting, and I am always a huge fan of Ridley Scott, and when he's working in historical epic mode, from Gladiator to Kingdom of Heaven, the director's cut is a little underrated still, I think. And the only one that it was a real miss for me is Robin Hood, the Robin Crow or Russell Crowe Robin Hood. But this is good. It's entertaining. It's big historical epic. Again, it's kind of surprisingly funny. It's weirdly anachronistic in certain ways. I mean, like Matt Damon's, mid-tier noble talks about going broke, and then when the crime is being discussed, I believe the phrase that Ben Affleck uses is deny, 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 which is like, okay, this feels very 1990s all over again. But it was, but it's good. It's entertaining. I recommend it if you're looking for something to check out this week and you've already seen the new James Bond.
So, a couple things on this. First off, Ben Affleck being involved in this, and to a lesser extent, Matt Damon. I mean, you're right. I think that they're marketing this as sort of a medieval Me Too. Is this a sort of an attempt to make amends for their connections to Harvey Weinstein? Just a sort of an artistic representation. That deny thing sounds like almost a direct reference to that. Did you get that sense?
Yes, I mean, there's certainly a case to be made that this is the medieval Me Too, that this is the reckoning, that the Golden Boys of Miramax have to have given their longtime relationship with Harvey Weinstein and their denials that they kind of knew anything or had any inkling of what was going on. And I think you can, if you were to make that argument, I think it would be a very, very reasonable one to make. It is, I think, more interesting than just that, but that is certainly an element of it.
Well, I would say that certainly, I mean, that can be part of the context of this. That doesn't mean that you can't enjoy the movie or that the movie itself isn't excellent, right? I mean, it's just an interesting part of the context of this. So, I'm not necessarily a big fan of anachronistic elements being in sweeping historical epics, which is the reason why I approached The Kingdom of Heaven with so much trepidation and was really actually pleasantly surprised by how little of it was actually in there. But the art itself, the art should be able to stand on itself. And if it does in The Last Duel, I'm actually really pleased because it did look interesting. I will say, though, that it sort of reminded me a little bit of Rob Roy in the way it was set up, right? With the setup of the film, the epic battle over the rape of somebody's wife. Rob Roy did that. There's plenty of films that have done similar things. Sure. You can go back to Death Wish and Braveheart for that matter for similar types of structures in these films, and that doesn't make the films bad. It just is it's a well-known trope.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this more resembles a legal thriller than a big action movie. The action stuff is almost, with the exception of the titular last duel at the end of the film, the action stuff is fairly perfunctory, mostly just to give us a sense of kind of who these guys are and what sort of violence they are able to commit. So the last scene feels real, feels a little more built in, not just tacked on. So yeah, and there's just a lot of court intrigue and a lot of like political angling, which again is interesting. Maybe it's entirely possible that this is all made up and anachronistic. It's hard to say. I am not an expert in 14th century French legal history. So,
well, this is not a documentary either. It's supposed to be entertaining.
Exactly.
So, all right, speaking of entertaining, Daniel Craig has finally wrapped up his 5-film, I believe, run as James Bond. I have to say that my own particular perspective is that Daniel Craig is now my favorite James Bond. I found the Daniel Craig era films to be sort of more gritty, more realistic, more tied to reality than especially some of the later entries of James Bond. I think Roger Moore is the nadir of James Bond. I think of Daniel Craig now as sort of the quintessential realistic James Bond. How was No Time to Die? And do you agree with my assessment on Daniel Craig?
Yeah, I'm a relatively big fan of these movies. I'm not a huge James Bond guy. I am not a James Bond obsessive. I'm not one of these people who has watched Dr. No 17 times and can tell you. Can recite all the lines of every one of the movies. My first Bond, growing up was really Pierce Brosnan. So I don't have like a super strong attachment to the series. I do like the Daniel Craig James Bonds a lot. I have seen them described as the Dark Knight version of the James Bond movies, which say a little more self-serious, a little darker, a little grittier. Right, and you can even see the structure of this series in those movies. The Casino Royale is basically Batman Begins. Skyfall is basically Dark Knight, and then this movie, I think you could very easily describe it as a Dark Knight Rises style film. I would say that Daniel Craig is probably my favorite of the James Bonds at this point. I mean, I think it's him and Connery have kind of created the two most iconic versions of this character. I think it is fair to say. Again, I don't have super strong feelings about which is best, just because this is not, it's not my favorite series in the whole world. But there's something to be said for a series of films that's been going on for 60 years now. And I thought No Time to Die was a very good way to wrap up the current cycle, the current version of these films.
We've got about 30 seconds left, Sonny. What do you think happens next with James Bond? Does it become Jane Bond, or what's the next evolution for James Bond? You got about 30 seconds on this.
Yeah, so Barbara Broccoli, who is the producer and the head of Eon, which is the production company that makes the James Bond movies, has said in interviews repeatedly, James Bond is a male character. James Bond will be a man. They're not going to make a Jane Bond. In this film, there is a female 007, but 007 is a distinction, given by MI6. It's not It's not the character of James Bond. So I think they'll probably have a male James Bond. I don't think they're going with Jane Bond anytime soon.
All right, Sonny Bunch from The Bulwark, thank you so much. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh. We'll be right back.
Thank you, Ed Morrissey. Don't go anywhere, America. You've got to remember, check your Birch Gold holdings. And if you haven't checked them yet this morning, Ed can come back and tell you what the price of gold is this morning. Birch Gold is who I buy my gold from, who Ed buys his gold from. If he buys gold, and if he doesn't buy gold, Ed, you should be buying gold from birchgold. Well, actually, you're going to go to hughgold.com. That's pretty easy to remember, hughgold.com. Or text my name, Hugh, to 474747. That's Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. There's probably a story on inflation this morning. I don't know. I'm winging my way west. But I'll tell you one thing. We talked about inflation last night with Brian Westbury in the Atlanta History Center, and I can tell you, I can assure you, it is here and it's going to get worse. You need to diversify. You need some gold. You need to get it from Birch Gold via hughgold.com. Even if you can't buy any gold for yourself right now, Diversify your IRA. Get the free information package from Birch Gold via hughgold.com. Don't forget as well, relieffactor.com. I think Ed takes it. We should find out if Ed takes it so he could do these spots for me when I'm traveling on the road. Relieffactor.com. Icarian and Kirkman, resveratrol and Omega. I haven't been live since last night in Atlanta, so I can't tell you if the usual thing happens where someone comes up to me and says, I take Relief Factor every single day. But I can tell you, relieffactor.com does indeed work. Relieffactor.com. Icarian, Curcumin, resveratrol, and Omega. It's what you need to make your day complete. It's what you need to feel good about the way the day is going because it begins with a pain-free, aggravation-free morning walk, run, or commute. Relieffactor.com. $19.95 gets you started. Go out and get it today.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network.
Now.
The public would be outraged if they knew the truth.
Why do you think our politicians are not on the sidewalk right now talking to you?
Don't have no respect.
The old wall randomly turns into a guardrail, followed by miles of open border.
Human trafficking gone.
That journey is extremely dangerous.
The 7-year-old girl died in the desert
From the country of India.
A great pillar of the community was killed by a man who had been deported at least twice.
This little urn contains the ashes of my son. His dreams cut short forever.
We're so worried about other countries' problems, and we don't even focus on our own.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
In light of the belief of the CDC that 99%, 99% of the, help me out here, of the vaxxed, 99% of those hospitalized are not vaxxed, right? That's the claim. Or deaths. Okay. I think it's both hospitalized and deaths. Anyway, so if that's true, why do people give a hoot if people are not vaxxed? They're clearly not affecting the vaxxed, right? Given the spectacular success rate of the vaccination, why do you care if the next guy is vaxxed or not? And don't tell me, because they're taking up hospital space. So are motorcyclists who don't have helmets. So are folks who had men who had unprotected sex during the AIDS epidemic. So are cigarette smokers for a while. This is a new thing. You're taking up hospital space. So there is no threat to you who are vaccinated by the unvaccinated. You can't have it both ways. It's 99% effective, but you must get vaxxed. It's all about control. I told you that. That's how I began the hour. No, I actually began the hour about the Seattle city attorney race. But I want you to understand what this is about. You have the audacity to defy the left? F you. That is all it is about. That is what it is about for Joe Biden. The weakest, wimpiest guy to ever hold the office of president. He is the antithesis of a leader. We have a sheep as president.
Keep up with what's trending.
His most amazing discoveries thought to be written in a lost journal. Now, in the right hands, it could revolutionize the 21st century.
You can stop an earthquake.
Look for Salem Now.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today, and it's Friday, which means that the weekend's coming up and college football is coming up. Here to talk to us about the status of the top 25 and the upcoming choices for the college playoffs is Doug Lemerises, sports writer, podcaster for Cleveland.com at Doug Lemerises. Doug, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back. Good to see you, Ed.
So, I'm not Hugh Hewitt, so I'm not going to obsess over the Ohio State University's position here. But they're definitely part of the mix. I saw, I got your podcast. I didn't realize because I wasn't watching last weekend that Texas A&M upset Alabama. What does this do to the playoff picture now?
Well, everybody in the world thought the two best teams in the country were clearly Georgia and Alabama, two teams in the same conference in the SEC. Only 4 teams make the playoff. We thought 2 were going to be from the SEC no matter what. This maybe changes that. Alabama's still the favorite to get to the SEC championship game against Georgia, but Alabama has lost all of its wiggle room. Plus, it's just a huge upset. Alabama never loses. Somebody found a way to beat Nick Saban in the regular season. That alone is a mini miracle.
So, I mean, they got to get past Georgia now just to even get into the playoffs. Georgia is undefeated at the moment. Am I correct about that?
I think we are at the point now, Ed, where everybody agrees Georgia is number 1, and then we don't know. So,
right.
Georgia this week, there's only 13 undefeated teams left in college football, 8 of them among the Power 5 conferences. So really only 8 big dogs left. Georgia plays one of them this week. Georgia and Kentucky both undefeated. Kentucky a nice underdog story. So Georgia's got to be careful, but Georgia looks like the absolute best team, no doubt about it.
So you mentioned in your podcast that there's one team that has kind of come into contention. It's sort of a surprise team that's come into contention. Is that Kentucky, or are you looking at a different team?
No, it's the idea that Kentucky has gone this far. Kentucky beat Florida. Kentucky beat LSU. They're in the mix, but right down the road from them, the Cincinnati Bearcats, the fact that they are in this position, they're not in one of the Power 5 conferences. They're a real underdog story. They've beaten Indiana and Notre Dame. They look like they certainly could go 13-0. And if they do, I think they'll not certainly make the playoff, have a really good case for it. So Cincinnati, that's never happened. Nobody in their conference has made the playoff, and that's what we're watching the rest of this second half of the season.
We are speaking with Doug Lemerises and talking about the college football playoffs here. I got to sneak in one for my team, though, Doug. You just mentioned them, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. This is my team. This is the Heartbreak Squad. Every time they get into the playoffs, they find a way to make me wonder why they were in there in the first place. And they do have the one loss. Do they have a shot at the playoffs? Are they, on the strength of schedule, do they have a case for getting into playoffs, even if they win all the way out?
Yeah, it's probably tough. They still have a couple good games left. They got USC still left on the schedule, but that Cincinnati game was really big for them, too. The thing for Notre Dame is trying to figure out who the best quarterback is. We've seen a lot of teams this year play its backup quarterback. Notre Dame's played 3, and Drew Pine, the guy who's kind of like third quarterback, might be the best quarterback. So sometimes that can be a hard thing to figure out. I don't think it's going to be Notre Dame's year. I think they've probably already suffered the loss they can't have. But you know what? They could still have a very good season. Stay optimistic.
Yeah, it's for Notre Dame fans, that's always like, well, you had a good season, you got into a bowl game. Yeah. It's like, damning with faint praise sort of situation, because the expectation is, unrealistic as it is that Notre Dame's going to compete for that title every single year. And so and again, we get back to the Ohio State University. I got to throw this in there, I guess, because this is Hugh's show. It's not my show. Where is Ohio State coming in now?
So Ohio State is off this week. They get their little break, but they lost in week 2 to Oregon, and it looks like they can get over that loss. The hard thing, as you know,
right.
Notre Dame, when you're not in a conference, you can't win a conference championship. The Big Ten looks really good this year. So Ohio State has a tough road, but ultimately it has opportunity. Has to play Michigan State, has to play Penn State, has to play Michigan, and then looking like Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. Those 4 opponents are all in the top 10 in the country. So Ohio State, if you beat those 4, listen, that's a tough road, but if you do it, you're in. win. So opportunity still ahead for Ohio State.
All right, so I think we've already kind of settled that Georgia and Kentucky are the game to watch. Is the game to watch this weekend? We got about 30 seconds left. What's the other game that we should all be watching this weekend?
You know, it's a little bit of a rougher slate, but Cincinnati, again, they've played their two biggest games of the year. They're now in conference play. Everybody in their conference wants to sort of now ruin it for them. UCF, Central Florida, a couple of years ago went undefeated and claimed kind of its own national title, even though nobody else gave them a national title. So I think Central Florida is maybe one of the tougher remaining games for Cincinnati. Cincinnati can't let down. Keep half an eye on them.
There you go. All right, so those are the two games that we're going to be watching. Doug Lemerises is going to be able to analyze this next week for you after all these games are done. Thank you very much, Doug, for being with us. When we come back, a lot more news to discuss. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Southwest was devastated this week, straight up lying, talking about it was the weather. The reason why 2,000 flights were canceled over the weekend, Friday through Sunday, and then over 300 or nearly 400 more on Monday. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of these people just called out sick. They just called out sick. They've been threatened by their employer because their employer happens to be a federal contractor, and because of that, because the federal government has their hands in Southwest Airlines, they have to comply. Now, here's the news. Nothing has happened as of yet, so technically, Southwest Airlines does not have to comply right now. And they can wait for OSHA to make whatever edict they're going to lay out that has not been done thus far. But nonetheless, they suspect that it is coming down the pike. You get all these pilots, 10,000 pilots, 60 to 70% of these pilots are men and women that fought for our freedom, and we're going to kick them off the freaking job. Can you imagine the disruption? You talk about, we look at the ports in California. Can you imagine the supply chain disruption if now we can't even unload cargo ships and we're going to have fewer and fewer pilots? Fewer trained pilots? I don't want to fly. I don't know if they're going to be like United Airlines and bring social justice warrior pilots on. I don't even want to fly. Listen, if you're a pilot, I don't care if you're pink, red, white. I want the best doggone pilot when I'm sitting up in that can 30,000 feet above the ground.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Streaming on Salem Now.
The Democratic Party somehow has convinced black people that they're the good guys. Never mind the skanky history of the Democratic Party. That was a party of slavery.
He said, listen, I gotta give these niggas enough. Not too much, but enough that I'll have them voting Democrat for the next 200 years.
The race grievance industry would have you believe that blacks get up and think about nothing else except race.
If I tell you this is racist, yeah, I would get you emotional.
There is a whole big cottage industry for racism. If racism went away, a lot of people would be unemployed.
The mob during the Minneapolis riots following the death of George Floyd. A bunch of white thugs, frankly, burning down the city's traditional black and Asian business district.
They're racist, 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 racist. Everything's racist.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Bank transactions. The Democrats want the IRS to snoop around and check out what you're doing if you have a bank account with more than $600 in it. They want to get involved in your PayPal transactions. You're sending money to your kids. The IRS wants to know all about that. They think they can drag more money out of us. Like the IRS And the Democrats' scheme is we got to figure a way to pay for all this crap. All this spending the Democrats want. Okay, here's the way we can do it. Let's go audit a bunch of people and let's go check out grandma sending $601 to their grandkid via PayPal. And when a reporter pointed out to Pelosi that Americans are livid about this, and is it going to stay in your reconciliation bill? Pelosi had a very predictable answer.
Yes, there are concerns that some people have, but if people are breaking the law and not paying their taxes, one way to track them is through the banking measure. I think 600, but that's a negotiation that will go on as to what the amount is. But yes.
Yes. You think a multi-millionaire like Nancy Pelosi cares about a hardworking person being tracked by the IRS? If you have a transaction over $600, yes, some people are calling the bank. You better call your bank. You got a relationship with a local banker? You better call him or her, and you better demand there be a pushback.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Burka.
He is America. Captain America's trying, but nah, not so much. It's Superman. That's why kids have loved him. Adults have loved. When I saw Superman, I was 8 years old, and I saw Christopher Reeve. You believed a man could fly. And I wanted to be an American, and now I am. But they've killed it. They killed James Bond in the new movie. Sorry, guys, spoilers. I've seen it. It's crap. Don't waste your time. They killed James Bond. Dead. Gone. Because I guess what? He was too sexy? Too toxic in his masculinity? Gone!
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
The most powerful organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized.
We are now all rooting for his success.
That's not what happened. It was a complete ambush.
I thought it's early enough. Let's just send a couple guys over.
And the audience was, ha, 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 ha. How funny to set up an innocent man.
It divided the country in ways that people can't imagine. It's inspired massive violence.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
And then on CNN, Cut 43, they have come out and they've said, look, let's be very clear. We need to start trusting our teachers more. Enough of this kind of parent involvement thing. We're in charge. The state's in charge. Cut 43.
Of too many people who know little or nothing about education trying to tell professionals who are in this industry who've been working hard. We're coming in as weekend warriors trying to tell them about what education should look like. We need to put a little bit more trust in our educators because they've actually spent the time and energy necessary to really understand some of the nuances that are being kind of just blown over here in this conversation.
The nuances blown over. You hear that? Some 25-year-old University of Maryland educated Marxist knows about the nuances of your child better than you. I mean, come on, you got to trust the experts, everybody. And this really does show the divide as we dedicate this hour to what's going on with education in our country, which is the most important issue outside of immigration, election integrity. All those things are important. But I think everyone agrees that if we do not get education on a better path, the country is done. A majority of people in my generation thinks America's a terrible country. That is not sustainable. And this really kind of goes to the divide in the country, which is, do we trust a group of unelected, unknown experts to be in charge of important things, or do we trust parents, citizens, to have the liberty and the freedom to be able to make better choices?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Americans still have enough fighting spirit. We're not Canada, we're not Sweden, we're not Germany. And
I would say that even under lawful elections where it was close but you lost, the incoming administration would say, you know, we don't really have a mandate. Normally people would say, I've got to deal with.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
Morning, Glory America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I am back in California, but I cannot come into the studio today. So for the second day in a row, my friend from Texas, I can't even get used to saying that. He used to be my friend from Minnesota cold. Ed Morrissey is relocated from the great North Plain to the great Southern Plain of Texas, is back and sitting in for me for the first 2 hours a day before the Hillsdale Dialogue. Ed Morrissey, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Hugh Hewitt. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the Texas wing of the ReliefFactor.com studio, filling in for Hugh today. And we've got another great hour coming up for you, and another great hour after that with the Hillsdale Dialogue. So be sure to stay tuned for the entire thing. Right now, though, while I'm inflating the show, let's talk a little bit about inflation overall, because this is a big problem. It's only getting worse, and the White House spin is becoming even more unbelievable. Let's go to cut number one with Jen Psaki trying to explain away President Ron Klain's tweet about high-class inflation.
Why would Ron Klain tweet that, and would you agree that that's a little bit tone deaf?
Do you think 2 tweets means more? I'm just curious. So just for context, what Ron Klain retweeted was a tweet from the former chairman of economic advisors, Jason Furman, where he said, for full context, which I think is important, most of the economic problems we're facing, inflation, supply chains, are high-class problems. When he went on to say is, we wouldn't have had them if unemployment rate was still 10%. We would instead have had a much worse problem. So I think the point here is, well, there are some critics who are saying, what some of these critics are saying is, we don't know if they're saying that what they thought was great was when the unemployment rate was double what it is today, or when people were locked in their homes and therefore gas prices were lower. We're at this point because the unemployment rate has come down and been cut in half, because people are buying more goods, because people are traveling, and because demand is up, and because the economy is turning back on. So Jason Furman, of course, is more than capable of speaking or tweeting for himself, obviously, and providing any additional context. But what the point is here is that we are at this point because we've made progress in the economy. And what would be worse, in our view, is if the unemployment rate was at 10%, people were out of work, hundreds of thousands of people were still dying of COVID, and people weren't able to lose their homes. So that's the full context.
And that's a much more eloquent way of putting it than the high-class comment in that tweet. It's not the first time that Ron Klain's Twitter has drawn some sharp criticism. Is that something that the White House is addressing at all, given this pushback, this criticism?
Are we addressing the Chief of Staff's Twitter habits? Yes. It is not a top priority, I would tell you, at this point in time. The Chief of Staff is out there speaking on his own accord to members of Congress, to the media frequently, as any Chief of Staff does. And I think it's important also for anyone here to be able to tout points that they find interesting. And that's the purpose of public speech.
This is absurd. Yes, it would be better to have the problems that we have right now than to say have an asteroid hit the Earth. I mean, that would certainly be worse. But the idea that there's a trade-off between 10% unemployment and 5.4% annualized inflation that's on the increase after being described as transitory and temporary by this White House for several months in a row is that is not the one or the other choice that one faces here. And the reason why you have the supply chain issues is not just because there's demand, it's because the administration hasn't managed the supply chain. You've got a stack up of container ships off of the West Coast that's been building for months. It's gotten so bad that there's no more anchorage out there. Ships are drifting, and that was one of the reasons why you had the oil spill in Huntington Beach, because several ships dragged anchor over an oil well out there and ended up damaging it. This is a situation that should have been managed right from the get-go. But we'll stick with inflation, because inflation is in part something that they were happy to see when it was applying to wages. Now, Democrats put in the relief bills the unemployment bonus money, which was $600 a week initially. I think later it was cut down to $300 a week. It's now gone. But that was incentivizing people to stay home. Now, not everybody did, of course, because people actually like to work, and people understand that there's dignity to work. But when you set those incentives, people are looking at earning more money staying home than they would be going back to an entry-level job. There certainly were a number of people who were making the financially incentivized choice. And so you had this wage pressure that came up, and at the time, everybody was warning, this is going to be inflationary because wage cost increases come out in prices to consumers. And that's exactly what's been happening. And when you have a choked off supply because the supply chains are damaged and they're malfunctioning, while you have rising demand because people are trying to get back to work and people are trying to get back into commerce, you're going to have these inflationary pressures. Now, add to that what went on with rents, because the New York Times has a very good article out today. And it says, rising rents are fueling inflation, posing trouble for the Fed. Now, you can go into this. This is Gina Smialek, I believe is how you pronounce her name. She reports on this. The jump in rents stemmed from a frenzy in the market for owned homes. People tried to buy as the pandemic took hold in the United States, often searching for extra space, but the houses were in short supply after years of underbuilding following the housing crisis. And as buyers bid up prices on single-family homes and condos, many people who would otherwise move towards homeownership found themselves unable to afford it, increasing demand for apartments and home leases. Rents have further been boosted by the large number of people searching for places for more space and home offices during the pandemic. There's another reason why rents are increasing, though, which is rent prices are increasing, is because rent risks have been also increasing thanks to the moratoria that has been placed on evictions for non-paying tenants. That has forced landlords, many of whom, by the way, are only one or two property holders, right? These are small landlords whose personal finances are at risk when they have non-paying tenants. They have been forced to raise rents to cover those costs. They have been forced to ask for multiple months in advance, in some markets as many as 8 or 10 months in advance, as a lump sum in order to ensure payment from any new tenants that take over the properties. So you have these rising rent costs. You have these the rising rent risks, which are driving those prices upward, and that is also part of what is fueling inflation. We're going to talk about inflation a little bit more at the end of the hour with the Washington Post's Heather Long, who's been doing some very good reporting on this. And the problem with inflation, and especially for this administration, is that inflation is regressive. It's basically a regressive tax. It's a tax on the poor, because the more money you make, the more you're able to absorb at least mild to moderate inflationary pressures. Now, if it gets out of control, everybody's going to be hurting at the end of this. But the poor most of all, and especially in the way that this is that inflation is manifesting itself. You've got gas prices that are up 42% year on year. Now, granted, they were artificially low because of low demand. Nobody was traveling to the office. Nobody was taking car trips, or very few people were taking car trips last year. So there wasn't as great a demand for gasoline. But 42% increase in a year is something that people who actually really do need to use their car to get back and forth to work to earn an entry-level pay, that is something that almost entirely wipes out the buying power that they're acquiring. And especially when you look at wage inflation, which actually has been, this is fairly modest, 4.5%. It's now being outstripped by actual inflation, which means that even though the wages are going up, something for which the Biden administration was taking a lot of credit as late as a month ago or so, the buying power of those increases has actually decreased. They actually have less buying power thanks to inflation than they gained in those wage increases, which again everybody warned at the time was going to be inflationary, and nobody cared at that time, or at least very few people cared at that time. And so all of this wraps up into the so-called high-class problems. These are not high-class problems. And this is what the problem was with the Ron Klain tweet. This is a problem that hammers the people in the working class. It's a problem that hammers people in the retired class, because inflation erodes buying power, not just for people at working class wages, but also people who are working on fixed wages, people who are working off of their, or people who are living off of their accumulated savings or accumulated wealth. The retirees are going to be hard hammered by this. This is not a high class problem. This is actually a working class problem. And the Biden administration is making it worse. The supply chain problems, for which they're mostly missing in action, and especially the transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg, has been entirely missing in action. We might get to that a little bit later in the show. They are not managing this at all. They are making this worse for the working class, for people who are retired, living on fixed incomes. This type of inflation, we've seen this before 40-something years ago, and it's a nightmare for those people. I'm Ed Morrissey, filling in for Hugh Hewitt. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
The most powerful organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized to go after perceived domestic enemies. And that's very scary.
Our constitutional democracy enshrines the peaceful transfer of power.
We are now all rooting for his success. The peaceful transition of power is one of the hallmarks of our democracy.
We don't live in the United States of America as any of us would like to understand it.
We have a peaceful transition of power process. That's not what happened.
They interviewed General Flynn, and they did it in what was a complete ambush.
I thought it's early enough. Let's just send a couple guys over.
And the audience was, ha, 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 ha. How funny to set up an innocent man.
This is what third world security states do. They spy on their political opponents like this.
This is part of a concerted Russian influence operation.
Russian interference.
They colluded. They were in on it.
He would constantly say, I have seen evidence of collusion.
Until this is released, I can't comment. I can't go into the particulars.
Russians, I'm not going to be specific as.
But he knew he could just say it on TV and then hide behind, well, it's all classified, I can't get into it.
Well, it's classified, you can't see it.
Collusion, you just got to be willing to see it.
New York's Daily News ran this front page, Trump is Hitler.
How could 62 million Americans vote for Hitler? Are 62 million Americans Nazis?
We really almost thought it was a joke. Like, really, you're not going to accept that you lost this election?
Then they see the Russia collusion narrative sitting right there in front of them and say, why don't we just say that he cheated?
It divided the country in ways that people can't imagine. It's inspired massive violence. It's given people who are bad faith actors a license to do whatever they want because they literally feel like they're fighting Russian spies and Nazis.
Russiagate has been the most egregious abuse of everything that was supposed to have been good about our government.
The thing that they were investigating the Trump campaign for is what they themselves were doing.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
The image of Superman in a homosexual kiss. Because DC Comics, I guess they don't want to sell comics. And now the new Superman, the son of Kal-El, is going to come out as gay, or as Jeff pointed out, I guess he's bi, right? Whatever, who cares? But here's the bottom line. This is beautiful. I hope Media Matters is writing this one up. Hey, Zachy Poo, are you typing? How many homosexuals, how many gay people are there in society? 1%, 1.5%. Let's be generous. Let's double it. 3%! 3% of America are gay. And the gay people I know, they don't rub it in your face. It's just a thing they do. It's private. It's not an agenda they got to ram in your face. Say, look, this is me. It's the radical fraction of that 2%. The loud screamers. The identity politics harridans. So why are you trying to placate a fraction of 2%? It's dumb business sense, really. Means you're weak. It's not courageous to have a gay Superman. It's the opposite. You're a panderer. R.I.P. Commander Bond. R.I.P. Kal-El. Rest in peace, Superman.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com. Trending now on the Charlie.
I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com in the ReliefFactor.com studios. We're at the end of another week. So many stories to talk about. Tarzana Joe, the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show, joins us now. Tarzana Joe, what is the poem of the week this week?
Well, Ed, you know, when I first became a guest on the Hugh Hewitt Show, it was because you declared, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have my notes from 20 years ago. He said he would go insane if he did politics 15 hours a week on the radio, and he had to have a break, some Shakespeare, some fiction, some nonfiction, some poetry, and I'm kind of feeling the same way today. Good. I need a break from politics, a long-delayed vacation, some hours without worry to begin rejuvenation. But when I try to book a flight to wander in some heather, I'm told there's nothing flying. I guess it's just the weather. Perhaps I'll take a restful drive. But fuel costs more than vino, and with the gas that's in my car, I'll barely make Encino. I'll start my Christmas shopping, be one of Santa's elves, but when I get to Toys R Us, there's nothing on the shelves. I'll do some volunteering. I'll join the PTA. I'm sure the boards would love to hear the things I've got to say. I'll watch some college football, or maybe watch the pros. It's just a game, thank goodness. There's no politics in those. I'll stream some entertainment and hear a comic joke. It's just for laughs, and no one cares if comedy is woke. It is as if the universe is trying to remind us there's no place where we're breathing that politics won't find us. So don't sit on the sidelines and never be deterred. Now is the time for all good friends to have your voices heard. That's no break from politics. Sorry. By Tarzana Joe.
I don't think. I think that's one of those sorry, no sorry types of things. And by the way, you can. It's brilliant. I'm trying not to laugh, especially the Encino remark. The Encino thing is brilliant.
The point is, you're supposed to laugh. It's my success on the radio is measured by the guffaws I hear as I'm being guffawed from you, or from Ed, or from whoever is in the wonderful chair. Sometimes I even get a laugh from the producer, but I guess he wasn't listening today. I don't know.
Oh, I think he's listening very intently. And by the way, there are no supply chain issues at TarzanaJoe.com. So if you need a poem written specifically for some occasion, or just because you really like to have a poem written, go to TarzanaJoe.com. You can actually
he will work 24/7.
He will work 24/7.
I work truckers better at night. I'm told I work better at night, too.
Truckers are standing by, right, Tarzana Joe?
Yes.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. You know, I mean, there is no escape from politics. I love this poem. There's no escape from politics. There's no way you can get away from this. And in part, that's on all of us, I think. But it's always great to have a laugh at that. And look, I mean, I think that this is an absolutely brilliant segment. And you're right, and Hugh is right. You need you need to have some sort of differentiation here, and this is, I'm sure that you've enjoyed this so much as much as we've enjoyed having that.
Thank you. It's been a special part of my life. Certainly not as special as my wonderful golf game but anything in my great family. But it is a special part of my life to be with you and you on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
So again, go to TarzanaJoe.com, at TarzanaJoe, by the way, on Twitter. If you want your own poem, if you want to commission a poem from Tarzana Joe, TarzanaJoe.com is where you go. And Tarzana Joe, thank you so much for being with us today. Great to have you with us as always.
Thanks, Ed.
And while we get ready for our break here, just want to mention that former President Bill Clinton is in the hospital in Southern California at Irvine, I believe. And curious thing here, first off, we wish him well. We hope he recovers. But last night it said that he'd been in the hospital for a couple days for an infection, but was on the mend. This morning, today is reporting that he's in the ICU. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. I'm not sure if that is if he's just gotten worse or if this has been misreported in one direction or the other. But this is a story that, it's not really politics. We always wish our former presidents well and healthy lives after they leave office. So hoping that Bill Clinton is able to recover, but certainly a story worth watching in the next few hours. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the ReliefFactor.com studios. We'll be right back.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network.
His most amazing discoveries thought to be written in the Boston Journal.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Americans still have enough fighting spirit. We're not Canada, we're not Sweden, we're not Germany. And
I would say that even under lawful elections where it was close but you lost, the incoming administration would say, we don't really have a mandate. Normally people would say, I've got to deal with this closely divided group. I can't do great, big, dramatic things. This group has come in and said, we are going to go as hard to the left, as hard to progressivism, as hard to socialism, as hard to communism as we can, as fast as we can. We are going to go as hard to the godless view of everything as fast as we can. We are going to empower our enemies and insult our friends. We are going to undo everything the previous administration did, not because it's necessarily good for the country, but simply for the fact that the previous administration did it. And where that really came back to bite us in the backside, and I think that where you really start to see the let's go Brandon phenomenon is following Afghanistan. Because when the previous administration had left an exit plan saying, if you follow these guidelines, make it conditions-based, we can get everybody out safely, we can get all of our allies out before we take the military out, we can get rid of our equipment, we can do all this stuff. And because Joe Biden said, I'm not doing any of it, and the only reason he said it was because the previous guy did it, and we got 13 Marines killed, and we lost a lot of Americans in the process that are still behind enemy lines even to this day. That's when America woke up and said, wait a minute, this isn't right. And you're starting to see, I think, a groundswell that is going to roll all the way through the 2022 election cycle.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
His most amazing discoveries thought to be written in a lost journal. Now, in the right hands, it could revolutionize the 21st century, but in the wrong hands,
If you can stop an earthquake, doesn't that mean you could start one too?
That's why that notebook should never fall into the wrong hands.
There's an old brown battered notebook in my office at work. You have to find it, take it, and keep it hidden at all costs. The G20 leaders meeting downtown, they're in danger. In fact, the whole of downtown could be in danger.
If we are to build the superhuman, we must first eliminate those who are flawed.
People are created equally. All of downtown, the high-rises were built on rollers to withstand horizontal shakes. A vertical quake this size could collapse half of downtown.
We have commenced The countdown.
Shall we stop this thing?
Save the universe!
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
It's like a ripple throughout society. We've got Dr. Fauci hectoring everybody who's had COVID who didn't get a vaccination, even though they have immunity. But I'm talking about not the people who refuse to be vaxxed, but the people who've had it and yet we have 2 million people scheduled to come across the border in the fiscal year, and he's absolutely silent about it.
That's right.
He can't even utter the word.
Well, it's like the silence of the unmasked demonstrators. The medical profession said that's fine because it's
all 1,200 of them. I remember that well.
That's right.
And it's so what we're doing is we're creating not just exemptions for illegal aliens, but we're elevating them in some sense. We're not asking them to follow the law. We're not asking
right.
them to
So I want to know the
vaccinated.
original sin here. Is the original sin Ted Kennedy? Is the original sin the inability of the World War II generation to pass on American values? What's the original sin?
I think it's two things. It was the affluence and the leisure created by the 6%, just enormous affluence that was created, 6% a year GDP in the 50s and 60s, and we created the most leisured and affluent society, and it created certain expectations about human nature that create a guy like Ted Kennedy and create his idea that we're so wealthy, we're so powerful, we're so liberal, we're so wonderful that we're going to extend this and feel so good about ourselves and start deliberately having a policy where we don't apply the old rules of assimilation, integration, or border enforcement.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Boy, the state of Florida just fined Leon County $3.5 million because they fired
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, coming from the ReliefFactor.com studios here in Texas. And great to be filling in for Hugh today. And all this month, Hugh has been sharing many real-life examples of how your freedoms can be threatened by government and why it is so critically important that you go to HughHewitt.com right now, today, and click on the Alliance Defending Freedom banner to donate to ADF, America's largest and most successful Christian nonprofit legal defense organization. You'd think a church would be the last place that would have to worry about religious freedom, but over this past year, we've even seen churches being forced to close during the pandemic, something that raises big concerns by many public figures, including former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
There are those who would want to deny us the capacity to practice our faith and to worship in the way that we choose, or if we choose not to, no faith at all. We need to make sure that this nation remains that beacon of religious freedom for the entire world, to model how the dignity of every human being created in the image of God can be reflected by the capacity for those individuals to practice their faith.
ADF is fighting for us, so let's open our hearts and our wallets for them. Before your weekend begins, if you can afford a tax-deductible $100 gift for the Freedom Fund, I need your help right now to join Hugh Hewitt's campaign. If $100 is too much for you, well, we welcome your donation at any amount. Just go to HughHewitt.com and click on the Alliance Defending Freedom banner, or phone your gift to my special ADF hotline, 866-359-9644. Again, that's 866-359-9644. And thank you for supporting our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom. Great cause. The ADF is great. I love those guys. And, they're always willing to help us out in being able to analyze issues in the court, being able to provide us some commentary ADF is just terrific, and I'm very happy to be part of anything that supports ADF's mission here. So again, you can call it in 866-359-9644, or just go to hughhewitt.com and click on the banner. That's really the easiest way to do that. Now let's turn again back to inflation. We're going to talk about inflation with Heather Long from the Washington Post here in the final segment of this hour. But I want to talk a little bit about what Larry Summers discussed yesterday in a conference. We've got a clip of this, and then we've also got something else that's been reported that he said to this conference. Let's go to the clip first. This is Larry Summers talking in a virtual conference yesterday.
I actually see closer parallels to the situation in the 1960s that set the stage for the 1970s. We've again got a very expansionary fiscal policy combined with loose monetary policy. We've again got a central bank that is heavily focused on social objectives rather than on avoiding inflation. We again have a country that is substantially fractured politically. We again have an idea that if we just stimulate demand, we can solve most problems. And in the 60s, we saw, before there were any adverse supply shocks, we saw inflation move from having a one handle in 1966 to having a six handle by 1969. And we've got much larger budget deficits today than we did then. We've got much more in the way of supply bottlenecks emerging much sooner than we did then. So I think we're looking at a very serious kind of situation.
Very serious situation, and it's worth noting, too, that we weren't printing money in the 1960s like we did a little bit later in the 1970s. We started doing that, but we're printing money like it's going out of style these days, which creates its own inflationary pressures. And a lot of that is coming from the Federal Reserve, and now people are looking to the Federal Reserve to control inflation, to start raising interest rates, which is going to have a dampening effect on the economy, but which traditionally has been the model for the Federal Reserve to control inflationary risks. In fact, it's the go-to move, is moving the basis number up as a signal that money's going to start costing more. Therefore, it's going to be in less supply, and people are going to be less inclined to take loans, which does dampen inflation usually. But as we saw in the 1970s, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you end up having to escalate the interest rates while inflation is still rising. Hence, we got the misery index of the late Carter era, and Ronald Reagan being elected shortly after that to try to right the ship. However, that's not the only problem that the Federal Reserve faces, and Larry Summers was actually rather critical of the Federal Reserve. Now, this isn't in the clip that we have, but I'm just going to go ahead and read this off to you. This is from Fox News, reported this last night. He's excoriating Federal Reserve policymakers for paying too much attention to social issues rather than a pandemic-induced inflation. And this is the quote: "We have a generation of central bankers who are defining themselves by their wokeness," Summers said Wednesday while speaking to a virtual conference organized by the Institute of International Finance. "They're defining themselves by how socially concerned they are. We're more in danger than we've been during my career of losing control of inflation in the U.S. We've gone even further towards losing it in Britain, and I think we're at some risk in Europe." This is, I think, actually accurate. I mean, I don't think that the Federal Reserve is alone in this. You've got everybody taking their eye off the ball because they are so absorbed in social media clicks for wokeness that they're not doing the job that they're being hired to do, which is to implement rational, sound monetary policy. As you know, and that's just the Federal Reserve. We're talking about everybody: colleges, politicians, governors, the president. They're more concerned about wokeness. They're more concerned about being on the right side of a social media storm than they are in doing their jobs. And that is part of the problem with inflation. That's part of the problem that we're seeing, indeed, with with all sorts of ills in our society right now. But let's stick with inflation. I want to also go to a clip of James Gorman, who is the CEO of Morgan Stanley. This is from an interview with Bloomberg. Let's go to cut number 9.
And I think you've got to prick this bubble a little bit. Money's a bit too free and available right now. So, yeah, we're seeing, and I'm not a buyer of this story that it's all transitory, the inflation story. It's not transitory. I mean, wage inflation is real, and the supply chain interruptions, and you were talking about some of the natural gas and other things, have clearly been real. Some of that is temporary, but not all of it. So I think we're in a period where inflation is going to tick up. I think it's going to force the Fed's hand to move a little more aggressively than they're probably predicting now. And you saw that in the dot points that came out at the last FOMC meeting. I think, if I'm right, there were 5 dots for a rate increase in 2022. That moved to 9 dots at the next meeting. So we're seeing it through the Fed's own numbers.
And again, there are reasons why we're seeing a lot of different inflationary pressures. It's coming from all different directions, and a lot of this was predictable. In fact, it was predicted. The wage increase, the wage inflation that Gorman's talking about here was predicted. It was predicted on the basis of the massive spending bill that was passed as the COVID relief bill in April of 2020. Wherein they instituted that $600 per week bonus as a federal unemployment insurance to cover people who were being forced out of their jobs because of the COVID-19 shutdown. And people warned at that time that this was going to create an inflationary pressure on wages, and progressives embraced that, and they said that's exactly what we want. We want to force people to pay $15 an hour. If we can't do it by passing it as a statute, we're going to make $15 an hour the minimum wage through market manipulation. And they got what they wanted. That's exactly what happened. And now you have wage inflation, which is eroding the buying power on top of all the other inflation. That's eroding the buying power that supposedly these workers gained. In the meantime, you've got these supply chain issues. We talked about this extensively yesterday. We talked about it with Olivier Knox, also from the Washington Post, about how the system that we have right now, the just-in-time delivery system for manufacturing and for imports, is great until you run into a crisis, and then all of a sudden you don't have any capacity to deal with the crisis. And this, unfortunately, this administration doesn't have any capacity to deal with the fact that they don't have the capacity to deal with this crisis. That is supposed to be the job of the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, who has been MIA, as Politico pointed out last night. He's been on paternity leave for the last 2 months while this crisis has been percolating. Tom Cotton talked with Fox's Jesse Waters about this yesterday. Let's go to that cut as well.
You heard us discuss this. Joe Biden and his buddies moved everything off to China, and now it's a mess because our destiny's tied up with the Chinese. Anything happens in China affects us, like a pandemic or a supply shortage. And Joe's saying, oh, whoa, I'm just learning about this. What do you think's going on here?
Jesse, you put your finger on the root of the problem, that for 30 years we've sent so many of our jobs and manufacturing to China. It's not easy these days to buy a piece of furniture or clothing or shoes or toys for your kids or Christmas decorations that doesn't come from China. But now that's been the case for 30 years. Joe Biden helped create that. He also helped create the short-term problem because of the inflation that our country sees due to the supply shortages, from paying people not to work, from locking down our economy. All of this was foreseeable. He celebrates today that they're going to keep the Port of Los Angeles open 24 hours a day, which they probably should have been doing months ago. Exactly. At the same time, the White House is saying that you're probably not going to be able to get everything you want for Christmas. Well, I mean, who's going to save Christmas for Americans? Pete Buttigieg? I mean, please. Pete Buttigieg couldn't organize a one-car funeral. He's not going to organize our nation's ports and railroads and highways and airports.
No.
And to be fair, and I want to make this really clear, to be fair, the issue goes back decades in terms of port and port capacity and warehouse capacity. This country adopted a non-inventory, a non-storage methodology decades ago. It's called just-in-time, and it works. It's actually much more cost-effective for businesses as long as you don't have any serious disruptions to supply chains. When you start shutting down the economy, though, that is the type of thing that is going to create massive problems when you try to reopen it. There just simply isn't the warehouse capacity. There simply isn't the transportation capacity to just simply reopen this with a few extra shifts at the docks. And this is something that if you're a transportation secretary, maybe you should have been aware of. If you're the president of the United States, maybe you should have been aware of this when you're trying to formulate a plan to come back from this. This supply chain crisis is a major driver of this. It's not the only driver, but it is a major driver of inflation. And as we're going to find out from Heather Long at the Washington Post in our next segment, that inflation is very regressive, and it's going to be increasing. This is not something that's going to roll back. These prices are up, and they're going to stay up. Even if inflation drops back down, these prices are not coming down. The buying power has already been lost, and much more to come. I'm Ed Morrissey, filling in for Hugh Hewitt. We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Hugh Hewitt. As you know, I'm not there today. Ed Morrissey sitting in for me. I very greatly appreciate Ed Morrissey sitting in for me. But Ed moves very slow because he's in Texas. Everybody in Texas moves slow. They don't move around very much. But for the other 49 states, ReliefFactor.com. And for the rodeo people in Texas, ReliefFactor.com. And maybe for the Cowboys, ReliefFactor.com. I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega, the 4 natural supplements that, when taken in combination, make you feel great, make you feel ready for the day. ReliefFactor.com costs $19.95. I take it every morning when I get on that airplane, as I am right now, winging my way west. When I saw you last night in Atlanta, I had already taken it. Make sure you make your day as pain-free as possible. ReliefFactor.com. $19.95 gets you started. Sat down with the doctor who invented this 2 weeks ago now. And we talked about the whole story and how he just kept making more. Started out as a small batch for his patients, and it grew and it grew and it grew. ReliefFactor.com. Come right back for more Ed Morrissey here on The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of The Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
That's kind of my shtick. Traveling the country, going to high school and college campuses, talking about how we need to properly educate young people about American history, civics, the development of the character, understanding how parents should have a primary role in their children's education, trying to have young people understand that there is objective truth, educate them about metaphysics and a transcendent order and meaning. These are things that I've been warning about for years, and I don't want to say that I was ignored. That would not be fair. Conservative base always took it seriously. People considered to be a top 10 issue.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Streaming on Salem Now.
¿Cuánto queda?
No queda nada. Y lo siento mucho.
That's the only time you can come to Christ. When the Spirit of God calls you to the cross. Don't you hesitate.
Have you ever thought of going to seminary?
Madre, padre, ¿quién está listo para ser transformado por el poder de su palabra?
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
I grew up poor, which is even worse than being poor.
We would have sandwiches with no meat.
My American dream entailed working hard and making $20,000 a year. But I surpassed that goal and became a corporate CEO.
We'll all be able to say, free at last, free at last.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com. Streaming on Salem Now.
The public would be outraged if they knew the truth.
Why do you think our politicians are not on the sidewalk right now talking to you?
Don't have no respect.
The old wall randomly turns into a guardrail, followed by miles of open border.
Human trafficking. That journey is extremely dangerous.
The 7-year-old girl died in the desert.
From the country of India.
A great pillar of the community was killed by a man who had been deported at least twice.
This little urn contains the ashes of my son. His dreams cut short forever.
We're so worried about other countries' problems, and we don't even focus on our own.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go streaming on Salem Now.
Welcome back. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt from the ReliefFactor.com studios here in Texas. Joining us now is Heather Long, Washington Post economics correspondent and proud Pennsylvanian, who's been doing some very good reporting on inflation and especially breaking down the components of inflation. Heather, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ed. Thanks for having me.
I've really been appreciating your drilling down on the inflation story. Earlier this week, you were talking about some of the components of inflation and why that top line number of 5.4% annualized inflation rate coming out of coming out of September, I believe, is somewhat deceptive when you're talking about impact on consumers, probably especially more working class consumers and those on fixed incomes.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, highest rate in 13 years. So these are pretty big numbers that are very uncomfortable for a lot of Americans, but you really got to the heart of it. This is especially hard for folks who are middle class, working class, and certainly who are lower income in this country, because when you look at what's driving the inflation, it's no longer the used cars and the lumber prices. That was the story from the spring and the summer. Right. Now we're seeing three things really drive inflation. Number one is gas prices. Obviously, a lot of Americans are filling up that tank and seeing that very acutely. Number two is food prices, particularly almost any type of protein. So beef, chicken, fish, and even eggs are up more than 10%. From a year ago. And the last one that I have been warning people about for months now is the rise in rent prices.
Right.
So, great for homeowners who bought these homes and seen the home prices soar, but we are now seeing rent prices rise at the fastest rate since 2001, and that's likely to continue throughout the rest of the year and into 2022. That's not something that's short-lived or transitory. And I would also note that rent, what really worries me is it's not being driven by New York City and San Francisco this time around. It's being driven by a lot of cities that used to be seen as affordable, places like Boise, Idaho, Phoenix, Arizona, the Atlanta area. And so when you see the prices really shoot up in these places, where are people going to go?
And Heather, the New York Times actually has a big splashy piece on this today on rent inflation. How much of this is driven, do you think, by certainly by the real estate prices, as people have just gotten very restless? I just moved, so I'm part of that. I just moved a few months ago. Sold my house in Minnesota, came to Texas. How much of that is driven by, however, the rent issues, the moratorium, and the increase in costs for just people who buy just to rent, right? I mean, this is people. It's an investment that people make in these properties. How much of that is being driven by the moratorium and the difficulty in dealing with collections?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ed. I will say it's a little bit hard to know. Obviously, a lot of people predicted there would be a big surge in evictions this fall as that moratorium ended in many parts of the country. So far, we have not seen a huge surge in most places. So it's a little bit hard to know, okay, how much is that landlords wanting, and probably rightfully so, to recoup some of their lost money by raising the rent a bit. I do think of some factors that are overlooked that are driving the rent prices. Number one is people are going back to cities. They are going back to work. And so you see a lot of people who maybe moved in with friends or back in with family, with mom and dad, who are now going back and looking for an apartment again. The other one that's kind of interesting is the demographic situation. Several people have pointed out to me, we've just never seen this many people looking for a rental property. Obviously, you got your 20-year-olds who are looking to get started in a rental property, but you also have a lot of 30-year-olds and even 40-year-olds who can't afford to buy with the high home prices, so they're having to rent still. And then you have this interesting trend of a lot of baby boomers who've been there, done that, raised their kids in those homes, are now trying to sell into this high market and then go back to be renters as well. So that's some of the biggest generations in America are all trying to rent at the same time.
So, to an extent, this part might be temporary. That part of that might be temporary, but you're not going to see a deflation in these prices. This is probably what we're talking about. There may be a relaxation in the rate of inflation here, but we're not going to see a deflation in prices.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When you see rent prices go up, they tend not to sink too far unless you're expecting another pandemic-like situation, which I don't think, hopefully doesn't happen. I will say those demographic trends, though, suggest that we could be in for high rent inflation for a while. And I think the reality is, are we going to stick at 5% inflation overall? Probably not. But I keep telling people we are very likely into 2022 and possibly 2023 to be having uncomfortable inflation. What I mean by that is inflation that stays above 3%, maybe even 4%. And that's higher. That's higher than the target we have in the United States of 2% inflation. And for a lot of people, again, we were talking about a lot of working class people are really going to feel that. They are feeling that. People's expectations of where inflation will be for the next 3 years are the highest we've seen in a long time.
Heather Long from the Washington Post. You can find her on Twitter @ByHeatherLong. Coming up next, the Hillsdale Dialogue. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the ReliefFactor.com studios. We'll be right back.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
I have never seen in my life the orchestrated hatred to a group of Americans as I am seeing now. It's orchestrated hatred. You are allowed to hate the unvaccinated. Even if the unvaccinated had COVID already, and there is no scientific reason whatsoever for them to take as minimal a risk as it is the vaccine. You are to hate these people. They are killers. They are killing you and themselves. This is this piece of crap governor of California on television.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
I have never seen in my life the orchestrated hatred to a group of Americans as I am seeing now. It's orchestrated hatred. You are allowed to hate the unvaccinated. Even if the unvaccinated had COVID already, and there is no scientific reason whatsoever for them to take as minimal a risk as it is the vaccine. You are to hate these people.
On the Larry Elder Show.
Because the left is trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out, again, who's going to comply. Are you going to comply? Who's going to resist? Are you going to be willing to resist? How much power and coercion, this is what the left is trying to figure out, will it take to break the rest of us, the nonconformists? And who are the reliable, useful idiots? And sadly, there's plenty of those in the media. I've been telling you time and time again, we can't trust our institutions, the media being one of them. If you want to know what the left is thinking, you can look at the New York Times. You can figure out the angles they're coming from. There's other places, Vox, Slate, so on, etc. You can figure out, and you should know where they're coming from. Quite frankly, Washington Post is another one. Huffington Post is another one. And you can figure out where the left is coming from.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
The most powerful organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized to go after perceived domestic enemies. And that's very scary.
Our constitutional democracy enshrines the peaceful transfer of power.
We are now all rooting for his success. The peaceful transition of power is one of the hallmarks of our democracy.
We don't live in the United States of America as any of us would like to understand it.
We have a peaceful transition of power process. That's not what happened.
They interviewed General Flynn, and they did it in what was a complete ambush.
I thought it's early enough. Let's just send a couple guys over.
And the audience was, ha, 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 ha. How funny to set up an innocent man.
This is what third world security states do. They spy on their political opponents like this.
This is part of a concerted Russian influence operation.
Russian interference.
They colluded. They were in on it.
He would constantly say, I have seen evidence of collusion.
Until this is released, I can't comment. I can't go into the particulars.
Russians, I'm not going to be specific as.
But he knew he could just say it on TV and then hide behind, well, it's all classified, I can't get into it.
Well, it's classified. You can't see it.
Collusion. You just got to be willing to see it.
New York's Daily News ran this front page, Trump is Hitler.
How could 62 million Americans vote for Hitler? Are 62 million Americans Nazis?
We really almost thought it was a joke. Like, really, you're not going to accept that you lost this election?
Then they see the Russia collusion narrative sitting right there in front of them and say, why don't we just say that he cheated?
It divided the country in ways that people can't imagine. It's inspired massive violence. It's given people who are bad faith actors a license to do whatever they want because they literally feel like they're fighting Russian spies and Nazis.
Russiagate has been the most egregious abuse of everything that was supposed to have been good about our government.
The thing that they were investigating the Trump campaign for is what they themselves were doing.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
In light of the belief of the CDC that 99%, 99% of the, help me out here, of the vaxxed, 99% of those hospitalized are not vaxxed, right? That's the claim. Or deaths? Okay. I think it's both hospitalized and deaths. Anyway, so if that's true, why do people give a hoot if people are not vaxxed? They're clearly not affecting the vaxxed, right? Given the spectacular success rate of the vaccination, why do you care if the next guy is vaxxed or not? And don't tell me, because they're taking up hospital space. So are motorcyclists who don't have helmets. So were folks who had men who had unprotected sex during the AIDS epidemic. So were cigarette smokers for a while. This is a new thing. You're taking up hospital space. So there is no threat to you who are vaccinated by the unvaccinated. You can't have it both ways. It's 99% effective, but you must get vaxxed. It's all about control. I told you that. That's how I began the hour. No, I actually began the hour about the Seattle city attorney race. But I want you to understand what this is about. You have the audacity to defy the left? F you. That is all it is about. That is what it is about for Joe Biden. The weakest, wimpiest guy to ever hold the office of president. He is the antithesis of a leader. We have a sheep as president.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. There's no doubt about it. America is in the middle of a culture war. The battle between left and right is real. One side believes in American greatness. The other wants to tear it down. The Salem Radio Network and the Salem Podcast Network is looking for a few warriors who are already fighting this war. This is your chance to nominate a person worthy of the honor of being Salem's Culture Warrior of 2021. Go to this show's website and click on the banner. Help us select Salem's Culture Warrior of the Year.
Streaming on Salem Now.
The Democratic Party somehow has convinced black people that they're the good guys. Never mind the skanky history of the Democratic Party. That was a party of slavery.
He said, listen, I gotta give these niggas enough. Not too much, but enough that I have them voting Democrat for the next 200 years.
The race grievance industry would have you believe that blacks get up and think about nothing else except race.
If I tell you this is racist, yeah, I would get you emotional.
There is a whole big cottage industry for racism. If racism went away, a lot of people would be unemployed.
The mob during the Minneapolis riots following the death of George Floyd. A bunch of white thugs, frankly, burning down the city's traditional black and Asian business district.
They're racist, 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 racist. Everything's racist.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
The following program is pre-recorded.
I can't be there today. I'm traveling back to California. But I can, in fact, bring back an old but good Hillsdale Dialogue with Professor Paul Rahe. Dr. Larry Arnn also not available today. So we talked about who we'd been talking about in passing. It happened to be Montaigne. I talked about Montaigne with Harvey Mansfield. I talked about Montaigne with Jesse McCarthy of Harvard when we talked about African-American literature and his book on essays. Well, Paul Rahe and I did a conversation on September the 26th of 2014 about Montaigne. I call him Montaigne. That's how I was raised. But Montaigne, whichever way, here's our conversation for the Hillsdale Dialogue. Paul Rahe, welcome back. It's good to talk to you, Professor.
Hi, it's good to be with you. By the way, I'm no longer at Hoover. I was a national fellow last year. It's a one-year thing.
And so you've returned to Michigan. Is it cold there? Is it bleak?
Lovely. It's 71 degrees. Michigan in this season can be absolutely stunning, so and it is right now.
You're back in the classroom. Are you refreshed and re-energized after a year in California?
Yes, I'm always happy to be back in the classroom after a leave. Writing is a lonely task, and I like getting to it, but I get antsy after a while, so it's nice seeing students again.
So you know how our dialogues work. What you may not know is we spent the last 5 weeks on Shakespeare with Professor Smith and Dr. Arnn for most of those. But why did
you ever give up Shakespeare?
Well, we only had 5 weeks, and we do have to finish by the end of this year. But then I put a halt to the schedule and said we skipped over the man that I began my life as a senior in serious writing, Montaigne, because I had to spend my senior essay on Essay 26, Friendship. Let's stop and go find someone who can write about him. And I don't know if you're one of the Montaigne pronouncers or one of the Montaigne pronouncers. There's a division in the world. But they said, Paul Rahe will do it. And then they send me this essay you wrote, Don Corleone, Multiculturalist, which is in fact about Essay 26. I find this remarkable and wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote that some years ago for a conference, and I someday I may do a collection of essays.
Oh,
and the title will be Don Corleone, Multiculturalist, and Other Essays.
And other essays. Well, it's a beautiful piece on friendship. But let's start by telling people why it would be wrong to proceed for the next 500 years from Shakespeare without pausing to talk about the Frenchman.
Well, the part of the story is Shakespeare read The Frenchman. It was translated into English right away, and Shakespeare draws on him, especially in The Tempest. But the other reason is Montaigne. Everyone reads him in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. He's a dominant figure. He invents what we call the essay, which in French it means an attempt. And we still have that meaning in English as well. And he writes a massive book of charming essays, attempts, and he insinuates a new worldview. So it's extraordinarily important.
It is the only book that has been on my bedside stand for 40 years. And I have the Donald Frame edition. Is that the one you use?
I have it in my lap.
All right. So you and I have the same book in our lap so we can go to the same page. Donald Frame did an amazing thing. And we often don't speak much of translators, but no one's really going to beat this, are they?
No. Look, I have the Screech as well. And Screech was a very great Montaigne scholar. He actually found Montaigne's copy of Lucretius with Montaigne's notes in it when he was having dinner with someone. He found it in his library.
Huh.
And I know Screech. He was at All Souls College, Oxford, when I was there as a visiting fellow. But Screech is it's not very literal, and Donald Frame is extremely careful. So if you sit down with the French on one side and the Frame on the other hand, you'll discover that very rarely does he go wrong.
Now, the first major introduction I want to give to people is Montaigne wrote, and we'll use Montaigne as opposed to Montaigne. My tutor, John Gibbons, made me say Montaigne for an entire year, so pardon me if I go backwards. Book 1 of the essays has got 57 essays. Book 2 of the essays has got 37 essays, and Book 3 has 13. My tutor paid a lot of attention to numbers and ordering. Do you, Paul Rahe, when you approach Montaigne?
I do exactly the same thing. So, for example, I have in front of me the table of contents, and if you go through Book 1, the central essay, all three books are odd numbered, and the central essay in Book 1 is Chapter 29. Which is 29 sonnets of Etienne de la Boétie, who was his closest friend. So he honors him by giving him the central space. Just as you would put a throne of the great king in the center, and you would put his wife on one side, and on the other side you might put his heir and his son.
Now, it's interesting that you would read it that way. The conclusion that my colleague Gibbons came to is that he left it empty. That he wouldn't put his own stuff there, that there wasn't something central to his life that he wanted to write about. And he read into that some thoughts on religion that were perhaps not orthodox for the time.
Well, he certainly was not orthodox. But if you look at Book 2, the central chapter is of freedom of conscience.
Exactly.
A matter of great concern to this man who's writing in the midst of the wars of religion in France, in which he plays a very important role.
And then Book 3, the central essay of the disadvantage of greatness,
yes.
Which may be a little bit of a poker tell as to how he assumes himself to shine.
Yes, and it's also, look, he's deeply worried about one thing, I think, that runs through the whole book, and that is the manner in which our aspirations and our spiritedness get out of hand. I have in front of me essay number 3 where he says, we are never at home, we are always beyond. We live outside ourselves. And if you turn to Of Experience, which is one of the last essays, he says, they want to get out of themselves and escape from the man. That is madness. Instead of changing into angels, they change into beasts. Instead of raising themselves, they lower themselves. These transcendental humors frighten me, like lofty and inaccessible places.
The whole book is full of this. And so the first question is, someone listening, they go home and they order Donald Frame's edition of Montaigne, and it shows up, and it's a book stop of a book. How would you counsel them to read it? I do not believe in reading front to back in this, but how would you counsel them?
I would read initially. Eventually, I'd read front to back. But I would read one essay at a time. You have it by your bedstand. It's a good thing to have by your bedstand. A lot of the essays are fairly short. And you can sort of read one, mull over it, and fall asleep.
Yep.
And I would, a friendship, I think is extremely important.
Yep.
There's one called Of Cruelty. And it's very interesting because it's mostly about virtue. And its theme is that the aspiration to virtue, and he has Cato in mind, who commit suicide rather than submit to Caesar. The aspiration of virtue is rooted in a kind of cruelty. Of experience, I think, is a wonderful essay. Let me read you another passage. It is an absolute perfection and virtually divine to know how to enjoy our being rightfully. We seek other conditions because we do not understand the use of our own, and go outside of ourselves because we do not know what it is like inside. Yet there's no use our mounting on stilts, for on stilts we must still walk on our legs. And on the loftiest throne in the world, we are still sitting only on our own rump. I mean, there's a kind of deflation that he aims at. Come home. You know, it's a book about coming home to oneself.
It is also a book that is earthy, in that all of the natural functions are often discussed. And it's also a book that is stunning in how much he knew. I mean, he just had everything committed to that brain of his.
Yes, and, you know, he was reared speaking Latin. So his first language is Latin. And the consequence is he read all of the classical sources in Latin with the greatest possible ease. And he seems to have remembered everything that he wrote.
And he suffered a great deal. I will come back to this. He had terrible, terrible kidney stones. And as a result, when he writes about this, I've always told friends of mine who have that affliction, they ought to go grab Montaigne, and they'll find out that it's not new. The pain is intense, but at least it's well chronicled.
Amen.
When we come back from break, we're going to talk about Essay 26 of friendship, largely because, and the education of children, which figures into this. It's Essay 28, in the first book of friendship, with Dr. Paul Rahe of Hillsdale. It's the Hillsdale Dialogue. We're talking about the essays, the complete essays of Montaigne. The Donald Frame translation, I think I'm on safe ground saying, if you go and get this book, you'll thank me. I'll be right back with Dr. Rahe. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
To hear the White House press secretary blame Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott and other Republican governors for playing politics by trying to preserve jobs, not let people get fired over the vaccine mandate. What's the political gain for a governor to stand up to a tyrannical machine and say, you're not going to fire people because they don't want to put a medicine in their arm? You can't try to draw that line in the sand and say, well, the government shouldn't do it, but businesses can. We're either going to fire people over a personal medical decision or we're not. You're splitting hairs when you say, well, now the government, Gary Kelly flat out said, we don't want to do this at Southwest Airlines. He knows that this is a work stoppage. What's happened in Southwest, it isn't weather. They're not having any computer glitches. They got people working who aren't going to show up, and they're going to try to send Southwest a message. And Gary Kelly, the CEO of Southwest, admitted it by saying, we don't want this. Biden's making us do it. The government's making us do it. These zealots in charge, the kind of tyrannical governors we saw putting lines in Home Depot, and you can go to the garden section, but you can't go to the towel section, and all this crap. Put a mask on to walk to your table and take the mask off when you sit at the table. Like you can't spread COVID at the table, but you can when you're walking to the men's room. Are you kidding me? Would you stop it? And worst of all, forcing people to take a vaccine or get fired.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Right. So this has changed in the culture. We now have entire stadiums screaming blank Joe Biden.
Right.
I actually think that in some measure, this is a sign of health in the country.
I don't think you're wrong. In fact, my last column, I talk about a in essence, what the American people are feeling in terms of how they're being treated by the current administration.
Now, excuse me, by the way, I'm not saying I approve of it.
Right.
It makes me uncomfortable.
Clearly.
But at the same time,
we're talking about what we're observing.
It seems like a strange sign of health that we feel free enough to say that.
Well, and I don't even know that we necessarily feel free. What I would say is that the American people feel like kind of a battered spouse at this point.
Okay, you wrote an article.
And that the administration is so abusive to how they're treating people that this reaction that you're seeing, and it started out in 2 college football stadiums. It's now been in dozens to hundreds.
It's the new wave.
NFL teams had it going on this week. Talladega or NASCAR or whatever they ran had people chanting it. There is something so inherently abusive about how people are being treated
by the government.
They are, and particularly in a society that wouldn't consider itself particularly Christocentric. And it is, I am actually thankful, to your point, to see a degree of, we're not going to let this abuse continue, even if it's nothing more than using our freedom of speech to say something that's very vulgar and attach it to him. We're not taking it anymore.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe today at rumble.com.
The Democratic Party somehow has convinced black people that they're the good guys. Never mind the skanky history of the Democratic Party. That was a party of slavery. There is a whole big cottage industry for racism. If racism went away, a lot of people would be unemployed.
The mob during the Minneapolis riots following the death of George Floyd. A bunch of white thugs, frankly, burning down the city's traditional black and Asian business district.
They're racist, racist, racist. Everything's racist.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
Minutes after the hour, America, it's Hugh Hewitt. It's the Hillsdale Dialogue, that last radio hour of the week where we raise our eyes to something that is really permanent. And even in a week of new war and a week of worry and Ebola, I'm pretty certain that as long as people are reading, they will be reading the essays of Montaigne, probably in the Donald Frame translation. Dr. Paul Rahe is my guest from Hillsdale. All of the Hillsdale Dialogues are available at hugh4hillsdale.com. All of Hillsdale's free courses are available at hillsdale.edu. A paragraph from the first book of his 3 books of essays, number 28. For the rest, Montaigne writes, what we ordinarily call friends and friendships are nothing but acquaintanceships and familiarities formed by some chance or convenience, by means of which our souls are bound to each other. In the friendship I speak of, our souls mingle and blend with each other so completely that they efface the seam that joined them and cannot find it again. If you press me to tell you why I loved him, I feel that this cannot be expressed except by answering, because it was he, because it was I. I love that paragraph more than any other paragraph in this book, Professor.
I can understand. It's high-minded. Elsewhere in that same essay, he says that it's already something if fortune can achieve such a friendship once in 3 centuries.
You see, but that gives, I was reading your essay, and Madison writes about friendship, Bacon wrote about friendship, Cicero wrote about friendship. Those 3 writers all thought it was much more important, and something that rare couldn't be that important, right?
Well, it could be that important, but not important to most people, because if it can only happen once in 3 centuries, it's not part of our lives.
And do you agree with that assessment? Because I don't. I did not. I came to disagree with him on that.
Yes. Look, I prefer Aristotle on friendship to Montaigne on friendship. And Aristotle divides friendship into 3 kinds. Now, they often mix, but friendships of pleasure, the sort that children have based upon playing games, and they last as long as the play goes. Friendships of utility, the sort that businessmen have, or colleagues in departments. have, and they're ties you have to other people because you do business with them of one sort or another. And then friendships of virtue, which are friendships grounded in some sort of common project. Husband and wife have children. That's a common project, and it binds them together. Or missionaries, they have a common project. Or soldiers fighting alongside one another have a common project. Or people who would simply enjoy reading and talking with one another have a common project that raises them up, that holds them together. Montaigne has a way of debunking all the friendships except for the perfect friendship, his with La Boétie. So he'll say you really can't be friends with your parents because of the excessive inequality. He says it might interfere with their natural obligation, for all the secret thoughts of the fathers cannot be shared with children for fear of begetting an unbecoming intimacy.
He also, his friend is dead when he writes this, and he says, since the day I lost him, I only drag on a weary life, and the very pleasures that come my way, instead of consoling me, redouble my grief for his loss. That's kind of a dreary assessment. I've always thought that the values of friendship are much more permanent than that.
Yes, and the memory, among other things,
right,
would give one enormous pleasure. But he doesn't think brothers can be friends because of the battles over property. One of the things that I found most striking is that he doesn't think there's friendship in marriage is very likely.
Right.
He says, apart from being a bargain where only the entrance is free, its duration being fettered and constrained depending on things outside our will, it's a bargain struck for other purposes. Within it, you soon have to unsnarl hundreds of extraneous tangled ends which are enough to break the thread of a living passion and to trouble its course. Thank God that's not my marriage.
Thank God that's not his marriage. I'll be right back with more of Paul Rahe on the Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale can be found at hillsdale.edu. All of the dialogues, just put in the Hillsdale Dialogues with Hugh Hewitt. They're all at iTunes now, as well as at hillsdale.edu. Please don't forget, Alliance Defending Freedom. The banner is at the top of hughhewitt.com. For every education institution like Hillsdale that defends and believes in free speech, the Alliance Defending Freedom stands ready to defend them. But to do so, they need your help at Alliance Defending Freedom. I'll be right back with more of today's Hillsdale Dialogue after this.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Alliance Defending Freedom.
Tesla was a genius. His most amazing discoveries thought to be written in a lost journal. Now, in the right hands, it could revolutionize the 21st century, but in the wrong hands,
If you can stop an earthquake, doesn't that mean you could start one too?
that's why that notebook should never fall into the wrong hands.
There's an old brown battered notebook in my office at work. You have to find it, take it, and keep it hidden at all costs. The G20 leaders meeting downtown, they're in danger. In fact, the whole of downtown could be in danger.
If we are to build a superhuman, we must first eliminate those who are flawed.
People are created equally. All of downtown, the high-rises were built on rollers to withstand horizontal shakes. A vertical quake this size could collapse half of downtown.
We have commenced the countdown.
Shall we stop this thing?
Save the universe!
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
I have never seen in my life the orchestrated hatred to a group of Americans as I am seeing now. It's orchestrated hatred. You are allowed to hate the unvaccinated. Even if the unvaccinated had COVID already, and there is no scientific reason whatsoever for them to take as minimal a risk as it is the vaccine. You are to hate these people. They are killers. They are killing you and themselves. This is this piece of crap governor of California on television.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Boy, the state of Florida just fined Leon County $3.5 million because they fired 14 employees.
Coercion is just totally wrong. I think it's destroying trust in public health to the extent that there was still trust left over after all the stuff that's been done. But I think it's really, really negative, and I think you're going to end up driving people away.
You know, Governor DeSantis makes a great observation about the way the mandate is driving people in the other direction. And that's why companies have got to stop the mandates. This just has to stop. This isn't working. You cannot fire people over a vaccine.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Southwest was devastated this week, straight up lying, talking about it was the weather. The reason why 2,000 flights were canceled over the weekend, Friday through Sunday, and then over 300 or nearly 400 more on Monday. But the truth of the matter is, a lot of these people just caught out sick. They just caught out sick. They've been threatened by their employer because their employer happens to be a federal contractor. And because of that, because the federal government has their hands in Southwest Airlines, they have to comply. Now, here's the news. Nothing has happened as of yet. So technically, Southwest Airlines does not have to comply right now. They can wait for OSHA to make whatever edict they're going to lay out that has not been done thus far. But nonetheless, they suspect that it is coming down the pike. You get all these pilots, 10,000 pilots, 60 to 70% of these pilots are men and women that fought for our freedom, and we're going to kick them off the freaking job. Can you imagine the disruption? You talk about, we look at the ports in California. Can you imagine the supply chain disruption if now we can't even unload cargo ships and we're going to have fewer and fewer pilots? Fewer trained pilots? I don't want to fly. I don't know if they're going to be like United Airlines and bring social justice warrior pilots on. I don't even want to fly. Listen, if you're a pilot, I don't care if you're pink, red, white. I want the best doggone pilot when I'm sitting up in that can 30,000 feet above the ground.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
Back America, it's Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue we're listening to, originally recorded in 2014, is about the essayist Montaigne. And we're talking about friendship with Professor Paul Rahe of Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale are found at hillsdale.edu. Every single dialogue we've done for more than a decade is found at iTunes at Hugh Hewitt, the Hillsdale Dialogue. If you want to Google it, make sure that you do. I cannot tell you how much fun it is talking to Dr. Rahe. I'll be back next week live with Dr. Larry Arnn. Let's continue our conversation with Dr. Paul Rahe about friendship and Montaigne.
But it's also a spur to people. If it's that good and it provides that much, people are on the lookout for it. I got to ask you, Dr. Rahe, who have been your closest friends in your academic life? And in you've been at a few places, you've taught a number of places. Who comes closest to you to this ideal?
Well, there's a fellow up in the University of Alaska at Anchorage named James W. Muller. We taught together at Franklin and Marshall College back in the last millennium. And whenever we go to the APSA, we room together. And whenever we're together, the conversation picks up as if we had been speaking with one another every day. and it's a great joy. He introduced me to Montesquieu, about which I later wrote a book.
Really? Yeah. In fact, Montesquieu and the Logic of
that I've written.
Yeah. So do you correspond when you're not together?
Sometimes we talk on the phone. Sometimes we email, or there'll be periods of months when there's no contact at all, and then when there is, it's a joy.
And are you the same age?
Just about. I think he's 2 or 3 years younger than I.
And do you think that's a requirement?
No. There's a young man on the faculty here at Hillsdale named Matt Gaetano, whom I had lunch with yesterday. And, he's, 30 years younger than I am. But we're interested in Sir Francis Bacon, which he's giving a lecture on campus Thursday. And it's just a joy to speak with him. He knows so much, and he's smart.
Bacon also spent time worrying about friendship. Why are all these people worried about friendship?
Well, Bacon's also a debunker of friendship in something like the way that Montaigne is. These two figures, at least, are very much worried about excessive high-mindedness and the troubles it gets you into, about idealism. I mean, Montaigne is a real debunker of idealism.
He's a diplomat. He's seen a lot of war and a lot of intrigue.
That's right, and he's seen civil war. And he's seen high-minded religious convictions lead to cruelty on a scale that's just breathtaking, something like what's going on in Syria right now. So he wants us to tamp it down. And he's in a way a proto-liberal in the small L sense. A business culture, a commercial society, is the sort of society that he believes would be least likely to produce civil wars. They produce deals in which we split the difference. They don't produce conflicts of honor where we have to kill one another.
Right.
And so the attack on sort of high-minded friendship, he says he likes alliances that get hold of him only by one end. So he likes commercial relations. In other words, you have a relation. There's probably a restaurant in Los Angeles that you really like, and you go there a lot, and you may know the owner, and he comes out and chats with you every time you come. Well, you have an alliance with him, but it gets hold of you only by one end. He wants to keep you as as someone who comes to his restaurant, and you want to eat there.
Here's my second favorite line from the essays, Dr. Rahe. The surest sign of wisdom is constant cheerfulness. That's from the essay on the education of children. He writes a lot, not merely in that essay, but throughout the entire book on how to teach. And I wonder if it has influenced. Hey, I wonder if you agree with me, agree with him on the surest sign of wisdom is constant cheerfulness.
Yeah, I think so. Because, you've got to get a perspective on things. Things don't always go well. They're up and they're down, and you have to laugh it off. If you're anxious all the time, and that's one of the enemies. That, in fact, that third essay right at the beginning where I quoted a little snatch, the next thing he says is about anxiety. And if you anxiety means that you're living in the future and you're not enjoying things that exist now. Yeah. You've got to stop and smell the flowers. I don't mean people shouldn't work hard. I don't mean they shouldn't save. I don't mean they shouldn't care about the welfare of their children, which points towards the future. But they need somehow to distance themselves from all of the anxieties of the world.
You're right. In the second essay, he writes, I am little subject to violent passions. My susceptibility is naturally tough, and I harden it and thicken it every day by force of reason. I once interviewed the Dalai Lama, who said he spends at least a portion of every day imagining his dying.
Well, death comes up an awful lot.
Yes.
In Montaigne. Now, he knows that his health problems are going to get him in the end. But he's reflected on death. And it seems to me he's an Epicurean, which is to say he thinks after death there is nothing.
Right. He's not, although formally a Catholic, he's not a Catholic.
No. He's politically a Catholic, and he's a very moderate Catholic for the France of his time. He's very friendly with Henry of Navarre, who becomes Henry IV and gives up Protestantism for the throne. He's very friendly with Catherine de' Medici, the Queen Mother, on the other side. And they trust him, which is fascinating, that someone could, in a civil war situation, that someone could be trusted by both sides and be an intermediary. Now, he doesn't bring the war to an end. He would love to do that. But it's very striking. He lives with all of these anxieties and these fears, and you don't see them much in the book.
Now, earlier this week, I had on Ambassador Ryan Crocker, who served both Bush and Obama. He served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He served in Syria and Lebanon and in Pakistan. He had nothing bad to say about anyone. Wanted to go out of his way to say nice things about Kerry and Clinton and Panetta and Rumsfeld and Bush. I mean, he's a diplomat. Diplomats have to do that.
Yes. No, that's absolutely right. And you must think more in business terms, that is to say, in negotiating terms, than in terms of high principle. It is not a profession for people who have whose principles are a little bit too high. They have to be personally honest, but they've got to be willing to do the deals, and the deals are not always pretty.
Now, do you consider him as necessarily a genius? Because he put out so much, and each one of these is really amazing.
Yes. Each one of them is a gem, and you've got to read them multiple times before they begin to get through to you. They're charming and entertaining the first time, and every time after that. But to sort of peel the onion, so to speak, and to get to the center of the thing, you've got to watch him play with you and see where he is taking you, because the beginning of the thing at the end may contradict the beginning. And the topic may not be clear from the title.
Oh, amen to that. One more segment with Dr. Paul Rahe at Hillsdale College on the complete essays of Montaigne, translated by Donald Frame. That's what we're recommending to you. Don't go anywhere except to hillsdale.edu. Sign up for Imprimis, or go to www.hugh4hillsdale.com for all of the Hillsdale Dialogues. Stay tuned. Dr. Paul Rahe is a member of the faculty at Hillsdale College. Once each week at the last radio hour of the week, I give the hour over to either Dr. Larry Arnn or Dr. Paul Rahe or one of the members of the faculty at Hillsdale College, The Lantern of the North, and we talk about one of the great books or works or people of Western civilization. Montaigne, I did not tell you, was born in 1533. He died in 1592. So he's really a great humanist. He precedes Shakespeare. Shakespeare read him, becomes after Machiavelli, after the world is broken apart. And he's got an interesting place on most bookshelves, but not a lot of people know when or how to teach him, Paul Rahe. When do you teach him, and to whom?
Never. I've never had the occasion. I did organize at the University of Tulsa, where I used to teach, a book group. I did this every year, and we would pick one book to read. And one year we did Montaigne, and we sort of each week chewed over an essay, which is a wonderful way to do it, by the way. It's just perfect for that, because the thing is infinitely interesting. And the next essay, you have no idea where
you're going next. So let me then ask, as we conclude, you wrote this essay, Don Corleone, Multiculturalist. An essay is not a book, and it's not an article. It's a meditation at some length on a particular subject that doesn't fit well anywhere else. So as an example of what Montaigne invented, what are you doing in Don Corleone, Multiculturalist?
Well, I start off with the opening scene of Godfather 1. In the movie, but it also appears in the book, and I use the book primarily on this, where the wedding is taking place, and on the day that a Sicilian's daughter gets married, he can deny a favor to no man. And, a mortician comes to ask a favor of him, but he wants to pay him, because the mortician wants to keep him at arm's length the way Montaigne wants to keep people at arm's length. He wants to have a relationship with the guy who owns the restaurant that he goes to. He wants to know him, but he wants to pay him and not have obligation.
Not have obligation being the key.
Yeah, and Don Corleone is old school. You have to say, "Be my friend," and then if he asks a favor back, you've got to do it. Now, what interests me about that particular thing is I do teach Roman history, and I use that to throw light on patronage relations in ancient Rome. And they're very elaborate. I mean, if you do a beneficium for someone, they owe you officium, obligations, forever. And there is a tie of friendship. And if they come and ask another favor, basically, morally, you've got to do it. So it's the opposite. It's the very thing that Montaigne wants to avoid. And what I wanted to do in the essay is use the movie and the book, Don Corleone, to cast light on the difference between social relations in a commercial culture such as our own, which is the sort of thing that Montaigne is pointing towards, and social relations in a feudal society or a pre-modern society. And much of the world still operates on the basis of the ethic that is laid out in Don Corleone.
Indeed, a lot of the world does operate on that ethic. Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. But what I keep closest is relief factor. Even when I'm doing the Hillsdale Dialogue for you in 2021, I'm talking about relief factor. You need a lot of different reasons to get out there and exercise right now. One of them is to get rid of the stress in the Virginia governor's race, which is almost upon us. There are other reasons to be out working around and walking around this Friday weekend. I'm in California. I think I'm going to go down and look at the oil spill and see how well it's cleaned up. Or trundle along Huntington Beach. But I'll have ReliefFactor.com working on my side. As I tell you, every single hour of every single show, 3 times a show, ReliefFactor.com is a secret that many of you know about, have heard about, but have not yet tried. So it will still be a revelation to you that it actually works. I've been flying a lot this week. I feel great because of it. Do not worry about me. Just go and get your ReliefFactor.com. $19.95 gets you started. Icarian, Curcumin, Resveratrol, and Omega, all of it. A 3-week starter pack. And as soon as you try those 3 weeks, you can tell me, you know what, Hugh, like people in Atlanta did. That's pretty good stuff. ReliefFactor.com. I'll be right back with Professor Paul Rahe on the Hillsdale Dialogue.
Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
But the issue that is animating conservatives, animating moderates in a way that is unexpected, that is moving people in massive numbers in the state of Virginia and nationally, is education. It's the #1 issue. 77% of conservatives say that curriculum and education is a major issue. 51% of liberals say that it's a major issue. You go through the polling in Virginia. How much of a factor is each of these choices for your choice of governor? Abortion policy is 58% major factor, but curriculum on race and history, 62%. Now, the #1 issue is Virginia's economy still, but getting up there is crime and safety in Virginia. These are pretty good numbers, I have to say, for a Republican, meaning like these are issues that Republicans usually do very well with. And now we're in this circumstance where Democrats, people on the left, on television are no longer able to hide. They are trying to change the baseline of what is the new normal. The Great Reset, if you will. They are trying to propagandize you and gaslight you into saying, well, of course, parents don't have any say over their kids' education. They never used to say this. They used to hide it. They used to disguise it. They used to camouflage it. Now they're outright saying it. Virginia gubernatorial candidate Terry Mcauliffe has come out and he said in his debate with Youngkin, quote, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. He thought this was going to be like a big kind of rallying moment. Like,
keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Because the left is trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out, again, who's going to comply. Are you going to comply? Who's going to resist? Are you going to be willing to resist? How much power and coercion, this is what the left is trying to figure out, will it take to break the rest of us, the nonconformists? And who are the reliable, useful idiots? And sadly, there's plenty of those in the media. I've been telling you time and time again, we can't trust our institutions, the media being one of them. If you want to know what the left is thinking, you can look at the New York Times. You can figure out the angles they're coming from. There's other places, Vox, Slate, so on, etc. You can figure out, and you should know where they're coming from. Quite frankly, Washington Post is another one. Huffington Post is another one, and you can figure out where the left is coming from.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube and at rumble.com.
The most powerful organs of the state are not merely corrupt, but that they've been weaponized.
We are now all rooting for his success.
That's not what happened. It was a complete ambush.
I thought it's early enough. Let's just send a couple guys over.
And the audience was, ha, 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 ha. How funny to set up an innocent man.
It divided the country in ways that people can't imagine. It's inspired massive violence.
Look for Salem Now in the App Store or go to salemnow.com.
I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'm replaying for you a Hillsdale Dialogue from 2014 with Professor Paul Rahe. All things Hillsdale are found at hillsdale.edu. As I'm not there today and I wasn't there yesterday, I want to make sure that I appeal to you on behalf of Alliance Defending Freedom. They are the world's greatest civil rights lawyers on behalf of the people of faith and the people of free speech. And they go everywhere at any time. And before you begin your weekend, that you may be going out to an event to hear someone, you might be going to a rally, you might be knocking on doors for Glenn Youngkin in Virginia. Alliance Defending Freedom protects your right to do that. It used to be the ACLU, now it's Alliance Defending Freedom. To support them, and to support especially religious liberty at the core of their mission, head over to HughHewitt.com and click on that Alliance Defending Freedom banner. We've also been talking about Montaigne with Dr. Rahe and friendship. I got some cards from our friends at the Wild Adventure, TWA.US. They're really kind of wonderful. Hey, Hugh. Here in Montana again, thanks to your radio program. No bears allowed. Jamie S. I think the reason so many men go to Montana, I got a whole fistful of them here. Dear Hugh, finished Beyond Wild here in Montana. Thanks for sharing the analysis of this amazing program on the air, Bob B. Hi, Hugh. This is a life-changing event. It allowed me to meet men of all walks of life and to get some superb fly fishing in. Well, thank you, whose name I cannot read. Hugh, great week at TWA. Amazing to hear 12 guys tell their stories, and the fishing was great. I caught the biggest trout of my life multiple times. That's funny. That's Steve. Finally, dear Hugh, I spent a week in the Wild Adventure. I came into the week with the illusion that my life was in great shape. Now I know it is. No, he goes on to talk about what a wonderful time he had. If you haven't got friends in your life, or if you do have friends in your life, take them with you to the Wild Adventure. But you got to sign up now because it will fill up for 2022 as soon as we open the registration. That was last week, so it's just not going to be long. There are only 300 spaces available. Go over there and do that right now. And let me finally remind you that the Job Creators Network bus tour continues. I was in Atlanta on Wednesday night with them. I'll be somewhere else with them soon. Check jcnbustour.com to find out where Alfredo Ortiz will be, and I might be with him.
Oh, Sulla, the great dictator of Rome, his tombstone's been translated variously, but my favorite translation is, "No friend has ever done me a favor, nor enemy an injury that I have not repaid in full." That is the essence of the transactional friendship, right?
Right. Well, you can see it in Polemarchus, in Plato's Republic, in the first book. He's asked, what is justice? And he says, helping your friends. And then Socrates nudges him a bit, and he acknowledges, and harming your enemies. Okay, helping your friends and harming your enemies is a theme that runs through all of the plays of Sophocles. You'll find it in Xenophon. It is a major theme in Greek life and in Roman life. Helping your friends and harming your enemies is what it means to be a good man. A helpful, a useful man. That's exactly what Don Corleone is.
And Montaigne says, no, friendship is much higher than that. There's a seamlessness there. There is no giving and taking.
Yes, it's much higher than that, and the kind of friendship that is what we would call patronage you've got to avoid, or you're not free.
Okay, so now I got to ask you this because you're in a position to answer it. You are yourself an essayist, as he was. What do you hope to accomplish by an essay?
The first thing is you've got to charm, and the second thing is you have to carry your reader from the place where your reader happens to be, so that's where the essay has to start somehow or other, to somewhere else where you want to carry them.
But why bother? Is it fame? What is it that Montaigne or Paul Rahe is looking for when they write an essay?
Well, look, Montaigne is a lot more ambitious than Paul Rahe. Montaigne was looking to change an entire culture, and I think arguably over about 3 centuries, slowly, gradually, he transformed the way people think about things.
Wow. Oh, you make that claim for him?
Yes, he's a major figure. He's up there. He works by indirection, so it's not so obvious. It's not, Hobbes is very direct. Montaigne is very indirect.
I don't think I've ever, I agree with this, but I don't think, for different reasons, I don't think anyone has ever made that claim that I've heard them give him his due.
I think look, everyone read him. And you can trace, and that's part of what I do in the second volume of Republics Ancient and Modern, is trace the manner in which people start with Montaigne's position and work out the political, the social, and the economic consequences of the foundations he laid.
How interesting. And I think he introduced self-absorption of the best sort.
Yes.
A sort of reflection on the morality of your actions so that you would be judged. And clarity, honesty. Rousseau's a big fraud. Montaigne is telling you the real deal, though he may have some stuff hidden for political reasons, but he's very honest with his readers.
Yes. Oh, yes. And wonderful to read. Just a pleasure. And you're absolutely right. The place to have him is next to your bed, and to sample him, move in and out of it. And then when you get completely entranced, sit down and read the whole thing.
Well,
preferably with your friends.
I think I'm going to prod you to do an online course for Hillsdale on Montaigne. Maybe you'll lead to the Montaigne Renaissance, Paul Rahe.
Good Lord. Okay.
All right. Be well. Thank you, my friend. And thank all of you for listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show, the Hillsdale Dialogue this week. Remember, all things Hillsdale are found at hillsdale.edu. Their video courses are amazing. And you can go and find every Hugh for Hillsdale Dialogue by just Googling Hugh Hillsdale iTunes Dialogue.